Chapter 1473. There were some unexpected changes to the Black Temple in this life. The first was the shape of the building. The original route of the Black Temple seemed to be winding on the surface, but in fact, there was only one way to the top. This time, because of the strange reconstruction or the historical divergence from the information that Vashj gave to Duque, it seemed that there were two parallel passages leading to the highest platform where Illidan was. It was a special space sealed by a powerful magic circle. Two passages must be opened and the control of both passages must be obtained before the final platform could be opened. This seemed to be forcing the Alliance to split up and attack together. Then there were the leaders in charge of guarding on both sides. On one side was the shadow of Akama and Mother Shiraz. On the other side was Gurdig Bloodboil and the Soul Box. Akama did not follow Illidan in this life, but he was caught by Illidan once. Illidan directly used evil soul magic to extract a part of Akama's soul and turned it into a soul guard to help guard the Black Temple. Mother Shiraz was a six-armed female demon, and was a typical demon that would be better dealt with by holy light. Gurdig was a fallen representative of the fell orcs, and his identity as an orc was worth Thrall personally dealing with. The Soul Box was a taboo existence that involved the soul, and it also tempted the warlocks of the Horde to rush over like moths to a flame. Of course, things were not that simple. The Soul Box was an ancestral artifact of the Draenei, and Valen also insisted on retrieving it personally. This attempt to force the Alliance and the Horde to split up was too obvious, and it really gave Duque a headache. Finally, the temple reverberated with a faint, erratic spatial reading. Duque had always trusted the system elf. Perhaps he would not ask the system elf for everything and act according to the system's instructions. However, the system had told him that it was a scam, so he would definitely not risk his life and go against the taboo. Duque said solemnly, "Thrall, this is obviously a trap. I don't think it's a good idea to split up." Thrall was also in a dilemma. If they joined forces, then they would have to go around the complex Black Temple for 10 kilometers, which was obviously inefficient. And after gaining the support of the Nagrand orcs, not only Thrall, but the entire Horde's chieftains had a subtle change in mentality. That was a natural unwillingness after their strength increased. Working together also meant that the Alliance would receive a large portion of the spoils of war. Why was it always the Alliance who ate the meat and the Horde who drank the soup? Look, from the Molten Core, to Blackwing's Nest, to Karaj, to the Outland. Each time, the Alliance would take it all away. Not only did they want equipment, but they also wanted to pack up their enemies and take them with them. The tribe did not hate him, but they were still envious and jealous of him. Orgrim noticed this and was about to say something, but the dragon slayer Gruul gently clenched his fist, which was bigger than a small house. His fist cracked and rumbled. "It doesn't matter if it's a trap. Illidan is known as the king of the Outlands, but he has never dared to step into my territory. If he dares to come, I dare to hang his corpse on Blade Mountain. It's a pity that he's too small and doesn't qualify as a specimen." Gruul naturally had his confidence. He, who could anger the Black Dragon Legion, had never been afraid. Duque still wanted to dissuade him, but a major question lingered in Duque's mind. Had Illidan returned to the Black Temple? If he did, then Duque believed that as an agility hero, Illidan, who was still in a demigod state, had the ability to kill most of the Alliance leaders. It was quite dangerous to split up like this. If Illidan did not return, then the remaining bosses of the Black Temple would be a piece of cake. If they could take down the Black Temple before Illidan returned, it would be equivalent to cutting off Illidan's last foundation. When that time came, Illidan, who was like a lonely ghost, would not be a threat. The Horde still hopes to split up. Thrall took a step forward, his eyes showing a sense of determination. The Horde should not be a vassal of the Alliance. Not in the past, not now, and not in the future. If the Horde was not easily liberated from slavery and became slaves of the Alliance, Thrall himself would not forgive himself. But recently, there had been a lot of such voices criticizing Thrall's concessions and obedience to the Alliance. This also put Thrall in a dilemma. It had nothing to do with justice or morality. It was purely about the different positions and interests between the Alliance and the Horde. At this moment, Valen came. If that's the case, I hope to lead a Draenei army to join the Horde. The Soul Box is a holy artifact passed down by the Draenei ancestors. We hope to personally retrieve it. Now that the Horde and the Alliance are allies, and the new Horde is not crazy fell orcs, I believe that Great Chief Thrall will not harm the Draenei. Valen's soft yet firm words made Thrall feel a headache. The Draenei's fighting style is very different from the Horde. This doesn't seem to be convenient. Apart from the Soul Box, the Draenei will not participate in battles, and they do not ask for spoils of war. We only want the Soul Box, Valen insisted. Valen's request made it difficult for Duque. This was also the trouble with idealistic swindlers. Once they set their mind on something, even 10,000 cows could not pull them back. Then your safety. Duque had to emphasize this point. Valen's identity was too special. Not only was he one of the leaders of the Alliance, but he was also an important key for the Alliance to defeat the Burning Legion. There were many secrets that no one else would know if he didn't say it. However, Valen could be considered to be divided into two in the original history. In the normal main storyline, Valen was still the Great Quack, but in the timeline of the King of Draenor, Valen was dead. Duque firmly believed that with him pushing the course of fate, there would be no King of Draenor. The problem was, no one knew what Valen would become. Facing Duque's concern, the two Draenei behind Valen strode forward at the same time. We will be responsible for the Prophet's, teacher's, safety. Merid, a hero-level garrison officer, his combat power and loyalty were unquestionable. Imril. Duque did not know what to say about her. Should he say, as long as it was gold, it would always shine? During this period of time, Hoof's growth was simply astounding. After being forced to be a commander by Duque, Imriel seemed to have turned on some strange switch and suddenly awakened her talent as a commander. Other than the battle at the Illidari sentry post and the Legion fortress, she performed outstandingly in the following battles to clear out the Moon Shadow Valley. Now, Hoof was already a nominee for the next bishop. Chapter 1474. The Draenei were similar to the Night Elves in that they had a dictatorship. In the entire race, the power was concentrated in the hands of the archbishop and the bishop. For Hoof to be able to become a bishop candidate, it was already a sign of ascension. In any normal race or country, this would be an incredible thing, because Imriel was too young and lacked experience. Unfortunately, the Draenei had been hunted for 25,000 years. It was not easy for them to sneak into Draenor to recover their strength. Then Jaden instigated Nazul to launch the orcs, and once again, the Draenei were almost annihilated. Now, the Draenei did not even have many soldiers, let alone talented people. Most of them were civilians who were malnourished not long ago. Not to mention education, they could not even hold a weapon. Imriel's ascension was a little like picking the tall ones out of the short ones. On the other hand, it was because Imriel was in the right place. Don't forget, even if Imriel was just an apprentice of Karaber, her teacher was Valen. The god race had never cared about bloodline, only about teacher. With this relationship, as well as a good battle record, Imriel was able to get along well with the major races of the Alliance, and of course, more importantly, she was a talent that the Alliance's commander, Duke Marcus, valued. Although the Alliance's reliance on holy light weapons was quite high, on the contrary, the Draenei's reliance on the Alliance's daily necessities was even heavier. The Draenei urgently needed a bridge to smoothly communicate with the Alliance, and obviously, Imriel was quite suitable. Regardless of the motive, Imriel's promotion was inevitable. The current Hoof was no longer the novice apprentice who wore rough leather pants, a white shirt that revealed the back, and held a broken axe when Duque first met her. The Burning Legion's demons had destroyed and swept through countless worlds, and their equipment was also the best. Darkness and light were mutually exclusive, and when the demon's equipment was purified, it would become the sharpest holy weapon. At this time, Hoof was wearing a set of light purple patterned plate armor. Whether it was the middle of the gauntlets, the middle of the leggings, or the center of the breastplate, there was a magic stone the size of an egg. The faint holy light energy that flowed out was enough to shock any demon below the level of a lord. It was a short warhammer with a hexagonal edge. It was full of holes that had been repaired after many battles. It was an epic-ranked small round shield. One could even see the marks left by the Hellhound's horns, the marks left by the Demon Guard's axe, and the marks left by the Apocalypse Guard's greatsword. Duque sighed softly. It had only been a few months, but the young and inexperienced hoof had already grown up. Immortal had changed a lot. The only thing that did not change was the exaggerated curve of her buttocks and the standard S-shaped bend of her legs. Noticing that Duque's gaze was on her perky buttocks, she blushed slightly and shifted her body so that she was facing Duque. Now she knew that the little advance party mage Mark Dooku, who had been with her before, was actually a substitute for the leader of the alliance. He really couldn't tell anyone about this strange feeling. After that, he didn't have the chance to talk to Duque about it. No matter what, this was a strange fate and a very special experience. But now, she had to express her will in a businesslike manner, just like Merit. Duque looked at Immortal, the heroine who was supposed to be the leader of the Draenei in history, and then at the old shaman Valen. He sighed and said, "Our main force is restraining your old friend, so we can't give you too much support. If you know this, then I have no reason to stop you." The old friend was obviously Jaden. When Valen heard this, the light in his eyes sharpened. He couldn't help but have a higher opinion of Duque in his heart. For 25,000 years, the Draenei had attached themselves to many forces and asked for help from many powerful beings. There was even a force that successfully resisted the Burning Legion, but in the end, that force was destroyed by Jaden's conspiracy. It was really commendable for Duque to be able to maintain a clear mind while conquering the Black Temple. There are some things that need to be done. For my people, for the evil cause of resisting the Burning Legion, I will not shirk my duty. Valen's persistence made Duque feel that something was not right. Valen must be hiding something from him. Everyone had different thoughts, but the truly great people mostly had the same thoughts. Valen was definitely one of the few great people in the world, and Duque always had respect for this kind of person whose actions were all based on justice. Duque raised his index finger lightly and shook it. Two figures suddenly appeared beside Duque. It was a man and a woman with similar facial features. They are the Van Cleef father and daughter, my most capable thieves. With their help, it will be easier for you to resist the sneak attacks from the dark. Then, Duque waved to the other side, and Lilith and Solarian walked over. The fourth son of the Windrunner family, and the great astromancer Solarian. I believe their participation will make up for your lack of long-range attacks. Merid wanted to say something, but Valen waved his hand. Valen knew that this was Duque's bottom line. Thank you for your kind offer, Your Excellency. The Draenei have accepted it. I hope that we can successfully retrieve our divine soul box this time. I hope so. May the holy light guide the people of the world. Valen softly uttered a blessing that sounded like a charlatan. He led his people away and followed the tribe. Other than Varrock Salyafar, who stayed behind in Orgrimmar City, and the retired Lord Howl, all the big shots of the tribe had arrived. In addition to a few powerhouses from the Alliance, the tribe could be said to have a strong army. The Alliance seemed to be weaker, with only Varian, Fandral Staghelm, Muradin Bronzebeard, and Haduran Mingi as the vanguard. But the main formation was controlled by Duque, Mark Dooku, and the demigod Vashj. If not for the Dragon Slayer Gruul, the tribe would have been completely outdone by the Alliance. The problem was that Gruul was too large, and the attack in the temple still had to rely on the original main formation. Only by attacking the magic nodes where the temple's protective magic formation could they open the defense and let Gruul come up. Sigh. Looking at Valen's back, Duque felt as if there was a trace of haze shrouding Valen's back. He sighed softly and finally turned his head. Varian, I'll leave this place to you. Unless we see Illidan, Vashj and I are unlikely to attack. Varian nodded. Understood. Chapter 1475. It was useless. The orcs who had never seen the terrifying technology and war machines of the Alliance would never know how terrifying it would be when the Alliance became the enemy of the tribe. So what if I have changed? I only know that I have lost the devil's blood. I am just a laborer who can be abandoned by the tribe at any time. But with it, I am a strong person who will be afraid of anyone who sees me. Ha! Gerdig Splithammer was a laborer of the blood furnace. His father had been a famous centurion in the tribe. Back then, Gerdig, who was still very young, worshipped his father. He had dreamed more than once that he was like his father, leading his compatriots across the dark portal, and following the great chief Blackhand to conquer the world of Azeroth on the other side of the portal. Sal suddenly felt his heart palpitate, but his sense of responsibility as a great chief still drove him to carry this uneasiness and discomfort and continue to lead the tribe forward. He longed for power, not as a chief who could be abandoned at any time, but as the power of a warrior. The power that his parents could not give him, and only the blood of the devil could give him. Evil orc, you need to clear your head. Cain charged forward, and the totem pole that was as thick as the beam of a house was smashed towards Gerdig's head. Unfortunately, Gerdig's dream was shattered. This was originally a great opportunity to kill Old Cow, but Gerdig disdained it. Old Cow sank into 8 seconds of thinking about life. Sal's face was as black as ink. It was not just 1 or 2 people. To a large extent, all the orcs received from Draenor were like this. Bang! 2 extremely fast shadows converged at one point on the steps. 2 tall and burly bodies collided, completing a confrontation of pure strength and anger. What am I going to do? Gerdig, on the other hand, resisted the dizziness by relying on the strong physique that he had obtained from the devil's blood. Gerdig laughed, and his laughter was full of desolation. My father responded to the great chief's call and died in the world of Azeroth. I don't mind this. At least when my father died, he was a true warrior. I just want to ask, as a great chief of a tribe that even relies on the Alliance for food, what right do you have to ask me to surrender? Every time he awoke from the echoes of his midnight dreams, the harsh reality still reminded him that he was just a laborer doing manual labor. Orgrim wanted to cut someone up. Orgrim was a forgotten one. Cain was not immune to the confusion status that followed. I am Sar, the son of the former chief of the Frostwolf tribe, Durotan. I am the current chief of the tribe and the leader of all orcs. Now, in the name of the great chieftain, I order you to surrender immediately. All the evil deeds you have participated in will no longer be pursued. The nameplate on the armor was engraved with a few twisted Eridar words, Gerdig Bloodboil. Sar was silent for a full 3 seconds before he said loudly, "Take care of him." Until this day, when Sar stood in front of him. If you don't have food, go steal it. If you don't have territory, go steal it. If you can't steal it, go die. This is the tribe. This is the orc. To become a human's dog for a mouthful of food. But this is not the tribe I know. His crescent slash drew a bloody red arc in the air and collided with Orgrim's weapon. Not everyone would fall into tragedy because of the forbidden power. There would always be people who benefited. However, that was just his imagination. He pounced on nothing and hit his head on the wall, fainting. His physique and height were weaker than that of an official warrior. It was destined that he would never be able to officially become an orc warrior in this life. What was worse was that their poor wisdom and knowledge, coupled with their deep-rooted mindset, made them refuse to recognize the reality of the situation. Chapter 1476. Cough. Orgrim let out a muffled groan. As a Forsaken One, he retained the ridiculous power he had when he was alive. It could be said that there was an absolute difference in power between him and the Forsaken who were humans when they were alive. But he was being suppressed by Gerdig. Not only was he being suppressed, he was being beaten up. The warriors of the Horde were driven by their hearts of glory. They could be cruel and tyrannical, but they would never be despicable. Gerdig, on the other hand, was different. As a laborer, he had no taboos when it came to fighting. He clearly had the upper hand in terms of power, but this guy was pouring power into his weapon in an attempt to suppress him. To be more precise, he was using evil acid breath. From Gurdig's smelly mouth, he spat out a mouthful of nature's acid breath that was similar to the green dragon's. Caught off guard, Orgrim was hit on the spot. In a battle between horde warriors, the most they would do was to bare their teeth and try to overwhelm their opponent with their aura. Who knew that their opponent would be so despicable as to directly use acid breath? Orgrim's face looked as if it was splashed with acid. The pain of having his soul corroded by the power of nature made him cry out in pain. He rolled backwards like a lazy donkey. Obviously, Gurdig wasn't going to let Orgrim go. He took a huge step forward and swung his battle axe, mercilessly landing a acid wound on Orgrim's back. This type of attack also contained acid, and it would cause continuous damage to Orgrim. Shameless, Thrall couldn't take it anymore. He waved the hammer of destruction and charged forward, smashing Gurdig's head with the hammer. Get out of my way. I have business with this idiot who killed millions of orc warriors. Gurdig mocked. Sal only felt that his heavy body suddenly became light, and he did not know how he was sent flying backwards. It was a mysterious power that involved dark energy, and it forcefully expelled Thrall. This was not the end. The next moment, Thrall felt his blood being forcibly ignited by an external evil energy. Huff! It was as if there were 100,000 lighters in his body, using small flames to roast every inch of his blood vessels. Although the pain of his blood boiling was not enough to make Sal collapse, it was definitely not a good feeling. Sal suddenly understood how this traitorous evil beastman in front of him got his surname, Blood Boil. Gurchid's abilities were practically the enemy of all living beings. Sal was a little regretful. If he had followed Duque's strategy and configured the tactics and strategies in advance, he would not be in such a passive position. There were so many powerful warriors in the tribe, and it was long past the time when 2 or 3 little kittens could only hold up the front. Just as Gurdig sent Sarflying, Gagoma, who had been subdued 2 months ago and was originally guarding the walls of Hellfire, pounced forward. When Kilrog Deadeye and Kargath Bladefist, the 2 traitors who had revived and then betrayed the tribe, were killed by Sar, Gagoma rejoined the tribe. This expert of the Shattered Palm clan had lost both his arms a long time ago. He waved the 2 short axes that replaced his forearms and slashed at Gurchid. Wajin's spear and Inastrian's fireball hit Gurdig at the same time. Ha! Gurdig displayed an agility that did not match his figure. He actually took an extremely exaggerated step back, retreating a full 5 meters. There was not the slightest bit of annoyance on his face. Instead, it was full of ridicule. He spat out 7 words, "Come out! Soulbox!" As soon as he finished speaking, the entire environment around him suddenly changed. The originally dimly lit temple was suddenly filled with many translucent ghosts wandering in the air. They were full of mournful whispers of souls, causing every living being to shiver. The temple of Kara, the holy land of the Draenei, was once so dignified and majestic. In the temple, there was a divine weapon passed down by the Draenei from generation to generation, the Soul Box. When the most outstanding leader, the wisest prophet, and the bravest warrior of the tribe died, the Draenei stored their souls in the Soul Box, hoping to use the power of the divine weapon to make these great souls immortal. Unfortunately, nearly 30 years ago, the Beastmen occupied the temple of Karaba. Ghoul, Dan quickly noticed the energy contained in the Soul Box. He found the souls of the innocent Draenei who died tragically in the war and put them into the Soul Box. He also put the souls of the bloodthirsty Beastmen into the Soul Box. Combined with his own dark magic, the Soul Box was finally corrupted. But Ghoul, Dan did not expect the power of this divine weapon to be so strong. Even though it was corrupted, it was difficult for him to control. So he had to temporarily seal it and wait for a future plan. However, Ghoul, Dan never had the chance to see the Soul Box again. He followed Orgrim to Azeroth and finally died there. The Soul Box stayed in the temple until Illidan took control of the temple. In the Alliance, no one except Duque knew what had become of the Soul Box. Even the Draenei themselves still had an impression of it from 30 years ago. As for Duque's strategy, the strategy was dead. Most of the time, if one did not personally experience it, They would never understand the terror of the enemy and the complexity of the enemy's skills. A huge and illusory cage descended from the sky. Countless souls were wailing and crying. They opened their mouths and used the shrill voice of their souls to tell of the suffering they had endured in life. Hearing these voices, almost every living person felt their scalp go numb. Goosebumps filled every inch of their skin. Soon, the souls began to scream as they were driven by an inexplicable mysterious force and began to gather. In just 3 seconds, a huge illusory head appeared in everyone's vision. It was surrounded by a large number of crystal prisms, and in the middle was a man's face that looked extremely bitter. It opened its mouth and kept howling in despair. Thrall shuddered. He immediately realized that the first form of the soul box, the source of suffering, had targeted him. "Run!" Valen's voice suddenly came from afar. Evidently, seeing that the tribe was in a fluster due to the sudden attack, the small team of experts led by Valen chose to intervene directly. "Why are you running?" "Say." Ghoul, Tug sneered and spat out acid again. The corrosive liquid, for some reason, greatly slowed down Thrall's speed. "Great Chief!" At this time, Cain, who had fallen into chaos, came back to his senses. The Ox Chief suddenly rushed over, picked up Thrall, and threw him away like a flying ball. Oh, there was such a thing. Chapter 1477. This was a battle of life and death, and there was nothing that could not be done. The source of suffering, which was as huge as a floating hill, exuded a terrifying wailing aura while chasing after Sal. At this moment, all the powerhouses felt that the laws were deviating. The world that he was familiar with in the past was leaving him in fear, and an extremely terrifying power of resentment was descending. It was as if a demon king had descended into the world. An irresistible power was dominating everything and taking over the surrounding space. Something touched Imriel's foot, and she subconsciously lowered her head and found that there were many strange insects crawling out from the cracks of the stone steps of the shrine. They had all mutated after receiving the evil energy and filthy power of the Black Shrine, but now they were fleeing in all directions like crazy. Their survival instincts were driving them away from the source of suffering. Many ghosts that could not be detected by the naked eye began to drift over from all directions. They also wailed and sobbed, and then rushed towards Sal and the others like moths to a flame. If Sal was still a pure warrior, he probably would not even be able to sense these ghosts. But ever since Sal went to Nagrand and obtained the legacy of the shaman, even though he was not proficient in the path of the shaman, he was no longer a warrior who only knew how to be reckless. After falling to the ground, Sal quickly got up. A strong electric current circled around his body. The strong electric current produced a subtle magnetic field, causing the pebbles on the steps to spin strangely on the ground. Some of the tiny gravel even floated up and circled around him. He swung the hammer of destruction, and a thick electric snake slithered out, and the power of thunder blasted out. Accompanied by the sound of thunder, the ghosts around him were swept away. Sal could deal with the ghosts, but he could not deal with the terrible power of the source of suffering. This was no longer an ordinary concept of power. This ability to forcibly change the characteristics of the surrounding space was already within the scope of the domain. Be careful. Its strength is no less than a demigod. After Wajin shouted, he was unluckily hit by the source of suffering's soul siphon. Although the power of the soul was no longer as unfamiliar as it was decades ago, the existence of the power of the soul was always difficult to deal with. That kind of soul absorption was even more painful than letting the body bleed. In addition to the pain of being tormented in a sea of flames and blades, he felt more exhaustion and weakness in all aspects. Willen made his move. He immediately removed the soul siphon on Wajin. Golden holy light enveloped Wajin's body, making Wajin's complexion a lot better. Mal, Therad, attack. Imriel, assist and bless them with protection if necessary. The burly Drenii garrison guard charged forward in a S-shaped stride. According to Duque's strategy, the soul box didn't only have long-range attacks. In close combat, there had to be someone to tank the attacks. Otherwise, if they couldn't vent their anger, they would find trouble with other close combat players. Imriel wielded his weapon as well, but his eyes were constantly scanning his teammates around him so that he could provide support if necessary. At the same time, she also took the time to cast King's Blessing on the powerful warriors of her tribe. Although she seemed reluctant, the Van Cleef father and daughter had already appeared near the chest of souls like phantoms the moment Merritt was on top of them. They measured the distance between them and slashed at the chest of souls as far as their daggers could reach. The daggers that had been blessed by the holy light looked full of golden light. It was a beautiful sight. Lilith also followed the strategy in the strategy. She locked onto the soul box from afar and unleashed a rain of arrows. Sal had a slight headache. He had to make a decision. When Duque and William were not present, he was the supreme commander of the Allied forces. Now, the team had to face two enemy leaders at the same time. Normally, it would be better to get rid of the theoretically weaker Gerchage bloodbath first. He really didn't want to believe in Duque's strategy every time. A wise leader shouldn't always believe that the spy's intelligence was 100% accurate. But Duque's intelligence was too accurate. Even the leader of the Drenii, Willin, didn't know what form and special abilities the soul box would have after being desecrated and corrupted, but Duque actually knew. Sal had no choice but to believe it. According to the strategy, the soul box would have its second and third forms, all of which had a wide range of domain power. In a situation where the Horde didn't have a real demigod to hold the fort, they had to focus all their firepower before the pressure of the soul box reached its limit. So, leave that traitor to us, Orgrim shouted. A few burly but lifeless powerhouses gathered together. They were all chiefs who had died in the first and second battles of the Dark Portal. To Sal, apart from Zulu Hid, the others were all unfamiliar to him. They were the kind of people he could only call out by name. Kargath had defected after passing through the Dark Portal, so had Kilrog. There was also Harken Cranesplitter. Some chiefs had chosen to join the more powerful Burning Legion after resurrecting, while others still used their own methods to uphold the oath they had made when they were alive. Against Gerchage, who had the special ability to make blood boil, sending the Forsaken who had long lost their lives was the best way to deal with him. The only thing that could cause devastating damage to these dead people was damage to the soul. It was obvious that Gerchage didn't have such an ability. In theory, it was a good idea. Sal felt his heart palpitate for no apparent reason. He didn't know why, but he felt a little flustered and absent-minded. Unfortunately, there was no time for Sal to hesitate. I'll leave it to you guys. The rest of you, follow me to deal with the soul box. A leader's duty included making decisions in times of crisis. In order to concentrate their firepower, a total of 5 Forsaken warriors and Death Knights who did not receive any support charged at Gerdig. On the other side, even Anastrian, a powerhouse of the Forsaken, was drawn back to deal with the soul box. Fireballs as hot as the rising sun shot out from the Sun King's hands. Along with the flickering light, the fireballs that were as large as houses pierced through the darkness of the Black Temple and shot towards the soul box. Any souls that were touched by these highly concentrated fire elemental fireballs would explode like smashed watermelons, dissipating into the void. Everyone was focusing their firepower on the first form of the soul box, the source of suffering. From the looks of it, this aggregation of souls had weakened greatly, like a candle in the wind. At this moment, a cold and arrogant voice sounded out of nowhere. Yo, looks like you guys are having a good time when I'm not at home. Chapter 1478. It wasn't until this mysterious voice appeared that the allies who were in the middle of a fierce battle finally realized something was wrong. The air was filled with an evil that was both familiar and unfamiliar to every strong man. It was as if they were suddenly in a different place. They were not in the hall of the Dark Temple of Draenor, but were suddenly pulled into the twisted void. On the square of the Burning Legion's new fortress, the most evil Void Lords stared at everyone with malicious eyes. The feeling of having all their strength and trump cards seen through caused every single expert to be shocked, and the fear in their chests was simply unsuppressible. Thrall felt ashamed because this feeling reminded him of his life as a slave gladiator. He was like a product that could be discarded at any time on the wooden platform, allowing the buyers below to point at him. But in the next second, Thrall quickly calmed down. He carefully looked at the guy who spoke. In this world, it was not the first time he had faced a blind night elf demon hunter. Coupled with the huge bat wings on the back of the newcomer and the typical pair of demon horns on his forehead, his identity was already 80 to 90% certain. Moreover, a demigod night elf with a pair of crescent moon-shaped weapons that seemed to be burning with green flames, there was only one. Illidan's Storm Rage. The shameless traitor of Azeroth who had defected to the Burning Legion again and obtained evil power by licking Jaden's boots. Whether it was Thrall or Orgrim, all the hot-blooded orc powerhouses were envious. Without exception, they all hated Illidan. Jaden used a conspiracy to turn the orcs into fell orcs to serve as cannon fodder for the Burning Legion. Jaden was despicably playing with the orcs, then Illidan was the most cruel culprit in enslaving the orcs. After failing to challenge Arthas, Illidan used a small teleportation portal to escape to the Outland. In the name of regrouping for the next attack on Arthas, he obtained the approval of Jaden and annexed Magtheridon and his subordinates. He magnified the suffering that Magtheridon had inflicted on the orcs countless times. In a few years, when the orcs under Illidan's command expanded to the peak, they claimed to have an army of 1 million. Although it was exaggerated, it was at least 700,000 to 800,000. The price was the deaths of millions of orc civilians. The orc clans that refused to join Illidan were all attacked. The captured orc warriors were forced to drink demon blood, and the old, weak, and disabled were slaughtered. Once upon a time, the orcs slaughtered the Draenei to the point where they could only survive in remote areas with harsh environments such as Zangarmarsh. Illidan did the same to the orcs. Basically, normal orcs could only be found in Nagrand. If it wasn't for the fact that the elemental creatures in the Nagrand area were particularly powerful, and that Illidan was too busy with his mysterious business to personally lead the expedition, there might not even be a single normal orc to be found in this expedition. If it was any other situation, Sardu would have been more than happy to have his army fight Illidan to the death. Not now. The other side had sent out 2 chief-level big shots at the same time, pressuring the powerhouses on this side to the point of suffocation. Not to mention the sudden appearance of the demigod Illidan. Thrall turned his head abruptly and met Wayland's eyes. Both parties nodded in unison. Gruul! Holy light! Punish it! Thrall's ultimate move was to call his underlings. He didn't let the dragon slayer Gruul enter the Black Temple because his body was too large. Once he entered, the predecessor of the Black Temple, the Temple of Karaba, which was extremely precious to the Draenei, would no longer exist. Wayland, on the other hand, emitted a bright golden light. He wanted to use all the power of holy light in his body to directly destroy the soul box. He wanted to break the shackles of the soul box in one go. This was not an easy decision to make. But in front of a strong enemy, they had no choice at all. Thrall shouted the call through the magic communication device and was immediately received by Gruul. For a moment, there was a terrifying roar from far and near outside the temple. Gruul, this terrifying ancient beast, was rushing over at high speed. He was like a King Kong, climbing up from the outer wall of the temple. In just 5 seconds, there was a loud crack on the outer wall closest to the west side of the temple. A crack appeared on the seemingly hard and thick outer wall, and then the crack turned into cobweb-like cracks. In the next moment, the wall exploded, and a strong, earthy yellow light shone in from the outside. The building structure of the temple collapsed due to the strong impact. The 30-meter-tall pillars that required at least 3 people to wrap their arms around collapsed like building blocks. The huge floor tiles stacked up layer by layer like broken waves. It was just Gruul's first hit on the wall, but the shockwave caused by the surging force blew many ordinary orc warriors away several times. Some of the unlucky ones were pierced in the neck by sharp stone fragments. When his compatriots tried to cover his fountain of blood, the guy was already finished. It was at this time that Illidan ignored Wayland, who was attacking the soul box with a big move. His figure flashed and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was standing on the back of Gruul's huge left hand. Illidan's action stunned Gruul. The Dragon Slayer shook his huge head and slowly moved his face closer to Illidan. When Gruul noticed that the other party was not afraid at all, he suddenly felt that his dignity was being challenged. Who was he? He was the great lord of the Blade Peak Mountain, the most powerful creature on this planet. Any existence that came to the Blade Peak Mountain would have to take a detour and pray not to offend his dignity. A mere little thing dared to provoke him? Gruul opened his mouth full of fangs and let out a deafening roar at the little thing. Roar! It was a roar that would make even a giant dragon tremble in fear. In the next moment, Gruul suddenly raised his arm. He wanted to smash Illidan into the top wall of the temple. He could almost see Illidan being smashed into meat paste. However, Illidan only raised his left hand. The slender arm unique to the night elves held against the top wall of the temple out of thin air. This hand seemed to have an invisible magic that could bind the air together, forming a huge and invisible pillar that firmly resisted Gruul's great strength. Gruul's terrifying brute force that could overturn rivers and seas seemed to have hit the ground. No matter how violent his strength was, he could not move Illidan to the top of the temple in the slightest. Illidan's mouth curled into a sneer. A beast that only knows how to use brute force dares to call himself a king? As his voice fell, a dark green light exploded from Illidan's body. Chapter 1479. Gruul's arm suddenly sank. He tried to raise his hand, but it was as if he was locked by a set of invisible heavy shackles, and he could not move at all. Illidan slowly pulled out the pair of famous green blades from behind him and gently crossed them in front of him. Clang! It was a crisp and sonorous sound. Bright green demonic energy rippled on Azanatha's blades. The pair of divine weapons that were stolen from the Void Lord and were once again controlled by a Darksider suddenly resonated cheerfully. The gravel that fell from the broken roof fell on the blades and immediately hit an invisible barrier, refracting and bouncing off. The dazzling demonic light on the blades did not disappear in a flash, but became more and more violent. The dazzling green light seemed to overwhelm all the light in the large temple. As Illidan's fierce aura spread out, everything around him seemed to tremble in the storm. Get out of the way! Thrall finally couldn't help but shout. Get out of the way? If it was an agile thief, it would be no problem. Even the burly orc warrior had a decent dodge rate. But Gruul the Dragon Slayer had the size of a hill, and he could only take all the attacks head-on. Along with the sound of the wind being cut, an illusion appeared. It looked like there were countless crescent moons shining with blazing green light flying towards Gruul. Gruul roared. He had just balanced his body and raised his right claw to slap. It was at this moment that a strange dislocation occurred in space. At the last moment, Gruul the Dragon Slayer suddenly tilted his head. As a result, a long green line appeared at the connection between his left shoulder and his body. No! Thrall cried out in the distance. Gruul was a peerless powerhouse that he had spent a lot of money to bring into the tribe. Although this kind of method of relying on outsiders was a bit unreliable, in order to gain more voice in the communication with the Alliance, the existence of a demigod powerhouse was necessary. Even if Gruul was only a demigod and not a real demigod. Now, Gruul was obviously going to suffer a big loss. Because behind Gruul's arm, the extension of the green line could be clearly seen on the thick outer wall of the temple. It wasn't until a full second later that everyone saw Gruul's huge left arm, which was comparable to a train car, fly out. His arm spun in the air for about 5 or 6 times before finally crashing down onto the battlefield below. The arm that was chopped off fell in the middle of a group of tribesmen. Like a landslide, the arm that was half flesh and half rock crushed dozens of tribesmen at the bottom into meat paste. His arm, which had not yet dissipated, was still rolling out, instantly flattening the tribe's formation. Countless warriors of the tribe had their bones broken from the impact and died on the spot. The tribal warlords who were commanding the battle below stared at this scene dumbfounded. Their impression of Gruul's invincibility collapsed in just a few seconds. This was not the end. When Illidan's dual blades of Azanoth cut off Gruul's arm, suddenly, a rustling sound came from above and below the hall. It was as if something was breaking. No, it was no longer breaking, it was simply collapsing. The people in the fierce battle couldn't help but look back. The half of the temple hall closest to the outer wall suddenly split along the green line that Illidan had cut out. The side that was not connected to the foundation or supporting pillars, along with Gruul, who had lost his balance, fell down with a rumble and instantly fell to the flat ground near the entrance of the temple, causing even more terrifying secondary damage. Gruul was not dead, and his exasperated roar informed them of the fact. It was obvious that Gruul would not be able to participate in the battle in a short period of time. At this moment, everyone finally had a relatively clear understanding of the strength of Illidan, the king of the Outlands. No one present was a match for Illidan. For a moment, the air was dead silent. Illidan's figure flashed at high speed, and with just a few movements similar to a mage's blink, he had already arrived in front of Thrall. He could clearly feel that Thrall, who was holding the hammer of destruction, was trembling slightly. Illidan tilted his head and opened his mouth, which was also full of sharp fangs, to reveal a cruel smile. "Great Chieftain Sar of the Orcs, huh? You're not bad. I'll give you a chance to lead the entire tribe to surrender to me and become my slave. That way, I can forgive your sin of messing around with my fortress." In Thrall's eyes, only Illidan's aggressive purple-blue face and his menacing fangs could be seen. At this moment, he could no longer feel the loss of the dragon slayer Gruul. All he had in his heart now was fear of Illidan's overwhelming strength. But Thrall had never been a timid person. Otherwise, he wouldn't be the leader of the tribe. He took a deep breath into his lungs, used all his strength, and roared out. Classic. The reason why it was a classic. It was because the will and belief contained in it could not be replicated. 9 years ago, in the face of the powerful alliance, Thrall led the enslaved orcs to break free from the cage and break the shackles to gain freedom. 9 years later, in the face of Illidan, Thrall still had no reason to betray the freedom of his compatriots. If this hammer fell, Thrall himself might die. But life and death had never been Thrall's first consideration. All he had to do was announce an answer, the answer of yearning for freedom. The flames of the hammer of destruction illuminated half of Illidan's face. The evil face still vaguely retained the outline of the handsome night elf from 10,000 years ago. But at this moment, Thrall's behavior made Illidan feel humiliated. Because Thrall had chosen a difficult path that was the same as his, but the opposite, direct resistance. Then die. The waving Azanatha's dual blades looked like a green circle that kept spinning around Illidan. This circle easily avoided the heavy hammerhead and approached Thrall's neck at a faster speed. At this moment, a huge figure forcibly inserted itself between Thrall and Illidan. Ah! Thrall's eyes widened in shock. In his bell-sized eyes, in his field of vision, the figure that he once lost and once again regained, that incomparably familiar figure was split in half in front of him. Orgrim? No. Chapter 1480. In the original history, Thrall was only the inheritor of Orgrim's will. In this life, Orgrim was more important to Thrall. He was also Thrall's life mentor. When Thrall lost Orgrim for the first time outside the Dalajan city, Thrall was heartbroken and regretted for a long time. Orgrim returned as a dead person, and Thrall was secretly happy for many days and nights. After losing something once, he learned to cherish it more. Because in the entire tribe, only Orgrim understood Thrall's heart the best, and could stand in Thrall's perspective and think for the tribe. And as an orc who was once a great chieftain, his opinions and experience were incomparable. It was not that Wajin was bad, but Wajin was still a troll, and sometimes it was difficult for him to think from an orc's perspective. Now that Orgrim had been slashed by Illidan, how could Thrall not be shocked and pained? But the next moment, Thrall smiled bitterly. "I'm long dead." Orgrim cursed, and while his upper body was still on the ground, he activated Counterattack Storm. This scene was extremely strange. Orgrim, who only had half his body left, actually used his warrior skills in mid-air to hit Illidan's hammer a few times. Illidan retreated and held Azanatha's dual blades 10 meters away. With an amused look, he watched Orgrim fall to the ground and continue to jump. At this time, everyone realized that as a Forsaken, as long as the core of his soul was not damaged, it was impossible for Orgrim to die again. If Orgrim did not mind, he could just find a suture line to sew his body back together and continue to fight. Before Thrall could finish his joy, Illidan was unhappy. He spat on the ground. What a filthy and annoying trait. Since you're dead, just obediently become my power. Illidan's left hand put away his weapon into his portal bag, and then his empty palm suddenly stretched forward. A green ball of evil light floated in midair, and the swaying green light reflected the indifferent expression on the self-proclaimed Lord of the Outland. At this moment, the black cloth covering the upper half of his face could no longer hide the empty eye sockets under the black cloth, because the dark green flame of the netherworld was burning in the eye sockets like the flames of the netherworld. A bright light shone through, making Illidan look even more eerie and terrifying. It had to be said that the Van Cleef father and daughter were very brave. When Illidan jumped out, they made the decision to temporarily give up on the soul box and attack Illidan. Unfortunately, they did not succeed. A purple aura enveloped Illidan, causing their blades to bounce away before they could even touch him. One of the 4 members of the Illidari Council, Gathios the Shatterer, who had the skills of a paladin, cast a protection blessing on Illidan, making him temporarily immune to physical damage. The other 4-man party, the Night Elf Thief Wireless Deep Shadow, used Shadow Step to get close to Edwin Van Cleef. With a few stabs, he forced old Van Cleef to give up on Illidan and fight Wireless. No one could stop Illidan. The light ball on his left palm was dissipating bit by bit in his palm. Before everything around him returned to darkness, another existence that had been temporarily ignored suddenly erupted. Woo-woo! Following the indistinct wails of the soul box began to flash with a strange radiance. A purplish-black vortex emitting a terrifying aura opened above the soul box. The vortex spun rapidly. At first, no one felt anything wrong. Soon, everyone knew who this vortex was targeting. Ugh! Orgrim, who was still alive, suddenly had his soul leave his body. A green soul that looked exactly like Orgrim flew out of the remaining half of his body under the absorption of the soul vortex. Before anyone could react, it was sucked into the soul vortex. In less than half a second, everyone realized that the face of the soul box, the source of suffering, had changed into Orgrim's face. The former great chief closed his eyes, opened his mouth full of fangs, and kept roaring in a barbaric orc style. It was an unconscious release of pain, but it transmitted pain, fear, and even more intense emotion, shock, to the entire horde. Thrall turned his neck that was like a rusty machine and looked at where Orgrim was before. Ashes, and a tragic scene that was very fitting for this description. Orgrim's body was abnormally destroyed. It was as if all the water had been sucked out, and not a trace of weathering was left. Illidan stomped his feet, and in the next second, Orgrim's body was completely blown away like dust swept away by a storm. There was no trace of him at all. No! Sal shouted and couldn't help but shed tears of regret as he wailed. Illidan sneered, "There are many orc souls in the soul box. I don't care if there are a few more orc souls. What, are you still not going to surrender? Thrall, this is the last chance for you and your horde." The only thing that answered Illidan was a hammer. It was as if a volcano had suddenly been thrown at them. Illidan's face turned cold. "You're asking for it?" With a wave of his hand, the demonic spell, Darkbrush, shot out. Countless black shadow missiles rained down on the hammer of destruction that was thrown at them. The blazing flames on the hammer's head dimmed at a speed visible to the naked eye. After the hammer flew for a distance of 3 meters, it was already black and smashed into the ground. From the looks of it, this famous hammer was no different from an ordinary iron. The Horde Masters were angry. They went berserk. They gave up their target and rushed at Illidan. They wanted to tear this evil demon who dared to provoke their great chief and trample on the dignity of the entire horde into pieces. What a pity! The difference in strength could not be made up for with courage. Shadow impact. This extremely exaggerated shadow attack easily sent all the horde warriors within 100 yards flying. After a while, they fell from the sky like dumplings. Isn't this our great chief? Gertig yelled as he walked to Thrall, who was lying on the ground. He lifted Thrall up with both hands. Because of the dark energy transformation, his body was even bigger than the already burly Thrall. Gertig looked at Illidan. My master, you don't mind me torturing him, right? Illidan nodded mockingly. The power of blood boil entered Thrall's body, and the dizzy Thrall screamed in pain. Imriel, who was holding the soul box, could not help but want to say something. Suddenly, she heard Vanessa's voice. Calm down. Master is here. Chapter 1481. Shameless bastard, even if you gain power, you are still scum. Despicable bastard. Let go of your claws. It was a handsome voice. A formless voice could not possibly be described as handsome. But hearing this voice, it naturally reminded people of those handsome men who brought disaster to a country, affected the employment rate of single dogs, and made more girls have unrealistic fantasies. Behind Gertig, a fiery red figure suddenly jumped out, using his emerald eyes that seemed to be carved out of the finest jade to stare at the rebellious orc. His tone easily reminded people of those holy knights with an excessive sense of justice. Unfortunately, the fire element that surrounded his body was so dense that it was almost tangible, allowing bystanders to understand that this lord had nothing to do with clergy. Then, around this fiery red figure, countless flashing red lights appeared. Those were pieces of rubies that seemed to be the most magnificent ornaments. No, after a closer look, one would be surprised to find that all of the rubies were actually particles of extremely concentrated fire element. Rather than saying they were like rubies, it was more like the feathers of a phoenix. Every sharp feather pointed at Gertig, the fell orc who was in a crazed state of thirst for power. Undefeatable, Gertig did not even need to think about it. His instincts told him that this male elf in front of him, who was more beautiful than a woman, was undefeatable. That was not an ordinary powerhouse. It was obvious that this fellow had stepped into the realm of gods. Fighting with such a fellow was stupid in itself. He could not defeat him. Gertig was indeed cruel and tyrannical, but that was based on the fact that his strength was superior to his opponent. Perhaps he had killed many people, and many enemies that seemed strong. Unfortunately, deep down, he was still that orc laborer full of contradictions. Almost immediately, he wanted to find his own people to take the blame. Unfortunately, there were not that many powerful, his own people, who were free. A dazzling wave of thunder and lightning, like a roaring dragon, suddenly exploded in the temple. A red-haired female Naga with a swaying snake tail, 6 arms, and a standard high elf head appeared. With a single chain lightning, the 4 members of the Illidari Council were forced to jump over the wall. On the other side, a tall and skinny figure appeared, repelling the soul casket with one move. The blazing flames scattered the source of suffering. At this moment, the soul box began to reorganize itself and entered the second stage. Illidan's expression was ugly. His teeth, which were as sharp as a shark's fangs, were grinding against each other. When he saw the face of the person who had suddenly appeared, he could no longer maintain his arrogance as if he was standing above the clouds and looking down on all living beings. He became more like a mortal. You. After Illidan's aggressive first note, it was followed by a deflated note that sounded like he was falling off a cliff. Duque had never thought that one day he would hear a word or a syllable that contained such rich emotions. Originally, Duque wanted to show off a little and ask Illidan if he would choose to forgive her. He also wanted to compare what Illidan had in common with Mario's Luigi, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Teemo, and Guan Yu. She even wanted to sing, "The vast grassland is your love." But when they met, Duque found himself unable to complain. Because what he saw was the gentle gaze of an infatuated man. At this moment in Karazhan, Tyrant, who was in Duque's arms, could not help but turn her head and say in a mosquito-like voice, "He knows that Duque's is fake. He also knows that I am watching him." How could a truly peerless master not see through that the Duque in front of him was just an empty shell? In this life, Illidan did not have the chance to obtain the loyalty of Kael. So the only one who betrayed him was Vashj. However, Illidan didn't look at anyone else. He only looked at the puppet duke, hoping to see the figure of someone he was familiar with from those strange and disgusting eyes. As the brother of Malfurion Stormrage, Illidan's story was too legendary. Before he resolutely left Tyrant's side, his last words were, "No matter what I do, no matter what I become, I will always care about you, Tyrant." If this sentence was used as a love letter, it would probably be very lethal. Unfortunately, in this life, everything was ruined by Duque. The two brothers' fight for Tyrant had stopped because of the ancient war. When they came back to their senses, Tyrant had already been taken by Duque in the name of saving the world when she was captured, and there was no turning back. If Duque was just a despicable and shameless person who took advantage of others when they were weak, then the two brothers might still have a chance. If Tyrant was willing, they probably would not refuse. Unfortunately, Duque played a huge game of infernal affairs. Not only did he foil the Burning Legion's plan to invade Azeroth, but he also blew up Sardra's largest fortress in the Twisted Nether, becoming the greatest hero of all time. It was because of the double conquest of body and mind, as well as the approval of the moon goddess Elune, that Tyrant was determined to keep her chastity for Duque for 10,000 years, and refused any new relationships. As a result, Illidan's secret love could only be a secret love. The first and most beautiful love ended before it even began. Just like in history, if Malfurion had taken Tyrant, perhaps Illidan would have been even angrier. But if Duque had won the first prize, Illidan surprisingly did not find it so hard to accept. At least this was not the double blow of family and love. After all, Duque's performance in that battle was even more outstanding, and he had achieved something that he could only look up to. However, acceptance was acceptance. When it came to the Burning Legion, Illidan had a completely different view. On the other hand, Duque was also quite conflicted. Just by looking at Illidan through the endless nether on the magic mirror screen, Tyrant's emotions were already a little out of control. After saying that, Tyrant fiercely kissed Duque a few times. "Duque, if it's possible, and I'm saying if you really have that luxury, please give Illidan redemption." As she said that, Tyrant forcefully squeezed her body against Duque's chest. If it was in the past, feeling the pressure of Mount Hyjal, Duque would have been very happy, and he would be happily revising some 48 moves with Tyrant. But right now, Duque really could not bring himself to be happy. Redemption? This was a phrase that only people who had fallen into evil would use. If Duque remembered correctly, Illidan was playing infernal affairs at this time. Chapter 1482. Illidan had disappeared for so long, even abandoning his base. He must have gone to one of the bases of the Burning Legion, the home planet of the Eridar people, Argus. What was worse was that because Du had already played dirty 10,000 years ago and caused Sardras to bleed, Illidan wanted to play dirty. It was more than twice as difficult. He didn't know if Illidan had succeeded, but whether he had succeeded or not, and whether he was really playing dirty, Duque could only pretend that he didn't know. Once he was exposed, Illidan, who was probably a good comrade working behind the enemy lines, would be destroyed. Sigh. Duque sighed softly and hugged Tyrant's waist tightly. Their chests were pressed against each other, and they could clearly feel each other's heartbeat. The end of a true fallen is destruction. Only those with kindness in their hearts have hope of salvation. Hearing Duque's words, Tyrant couldn't help but look into the room. From the start of the attack on the Black Temple, Duque had moved Karazhan's command center to the elemental mana pool at the top of the Mage Tower. The mana pool was like a 5-man football field. The elemental emissaries led by Khadgar were monitoring the operation of the magic net, making adjustments from time to time to change the flow and supply of mana. At the side of the field was the command center where Duque and Tyrant were. Although the room was very comfortable, with a desk and a bed to rest on, this was undoubtedly the core of Karazhan's control. All the large mana circuits were located in the command center. From here, Tyrant could see the few elemental emissaries in the elemental pool. Thaddeus, who had been turned into a monster-like construct by the cataclysm, was no longer a living person, but he could still smile and live on as an elemental creature. Sapphiron, the bone dragon that had once brought death and destruction to Azeroth, was now performing his duties gracefully. Black Witch Farina, who had once been a vicious woman, was now obedient like a little wife who would only be bullied, helping Khadgar. There was also Onyxia, the infamous little female dragon, who seemed to have completely accepted her identity as a mount. She was willing to let Duke ride her day and night as if she was in danger. When Duke didn't have time to care about her, she would either stay in her room full of gold coins and sleep soundly, or, like now, she would gracefully put up her orchid fingers and gently sip the warm black tea. Of course, the entertainment program that the Black Dragon Princess watched to kill time while drinking tea wasn't anything good. Watching the various creatures that invaded Karazhan through the cracks in space being crushed by the Einherjars of Karazhan was her favorite hobby. Tyrant thought of the Kiraji twin emperors who were still at the front lines, Prince Kael, that's who had been labeled a traitor, and Vashj who had recently returned. Tyrant suddenly felt a lot better. So many fallen and terrible people had found redemption after meeting Duque. Perhaps Illidan could too. Duque could clearly feel that Tyrant's body was no longer tense. The High Priestess was as soft as water when she relaxed. Duque smiled bitterly. Many things were happening in Karazhan, but the Black Temple didn't stop either. Kael, that was able to defeat Gurdig in a single exchange. After all, the mutant fell orc boss' biggest trump card, Blood Boil, was completely ineffective against Kael. That's Boil? My blood has never turned cold, nor has it ever stopped. Kael, that's opened his arms, and a fire phoenix rose from his wide red cloak with golden edges. With a clear cry of the phoenix, countless fire feathers rained down on Gurdig, easily making him repent in the purgatory of flames. Ah! Gurdig rolled in the sea of fire in pain. He was knocked down, but he didn't die on the spot. The many evil potions that he had drunk had greatly strengthened his body. While his body grew larger, he also had resistance to various elements. This only increased his pain. Just 2 meters away, Thrall watched silently as Gurdig walked towards death, but didn't try to stop him. Every true orc would despise this guy who had blasphemed the bravery of the orcs and blasphemed the most precious tradition. The soul box fell into silence. Perhaps it would enter the second stage in a minute or two. At this point in time, the battle stopped. Illidan didn't move. The 4 members of the Illidari Council were being suppressed by Vashj, but after Kael, that's took care of them, Vashj didn't attack the 4 ruthlessly. The 4 used to be Kaizi's subordinates. Gathios the Shatter, Zarever the high-level mage, Duchess Mayland, and Weirlis Deep Shadow. When Kael, that's appeared in front of them again in a tyrannical manner, their faces didn't look good. Originally, the Illidari Council was established by Kael, that's. The role of the council was to manage the Black Temple for Illidan and deal with the various daily affairs of the Black Temple. This included, Gathios was responsible for the food supply of the fell orcs in the Black Temple. Zarever was responsible for the magical energy supply of the Blood Elves in the Forbidden Palace. Mayland was responsible for the management of the demons in the Black Temple. In this life, because of Duque's intervention, Kaizi's fate took a turn. He was no longer the Blood Elf Prince who betrayed the Alliance. In addition, Kaizi had long been exiled to the Dalajan, so his demonic addiction was the least. In this life, he came to the Outland as an Alliance expeditionary force. When his demonic addiction was at its most severe, Kaizi used a method of letting it go. The most severely addicted went to Shotrath City to become an astrologer. The most physically addicted ran to Illidan, begging for the power of dark energy to satisfy the emptiness of their body and mind. Using dark energy to satisfy their demonic addiction was like drinking poison to quench their thirst. But these blood elves couldn't control themselves at all, so they could only bite the bullet and agree. As fate would have it, in the end, it was because of these 4 that they were chosen as members of the Illidari Council. Illidan had also suspected that the Illidari Council's role was to play spy on Kaizi, To have these guys come to spy on him and report his every move to Kale, that's. But regardless of whether these blood elves' defection was Kale, that's conspiracy, or an arrangement with ulterior motives, the conceited Illidan didn't care. He never took these blood elves seriously. If he wanted to, he could destroy Kale, that's and his entire blood elf race at any time. Moreover, he really had no one around him that he could use. Interestingly, at this moment, when the four of them saw their former master, their awkward expressions showed that they had really come to seek refuge with Illidan. Chapter 1483. Kale, that was still the half-baked commander who had lost contact with his home planet and was in an awkward position and could not solve his subordinate's demon addiction. Then Illidari and the others could just abandon Kale, that's. Aside from good and evil, this was a typical example of people going to higher places. But now, Kaizi had the aura of a king returning. It was obvious that Kale, that's had used some way to temporarily merge his mount, the phoenix named Ao, into his body, and obtained most of the power of this phoenix that had just entered adulthood. Compared to the dragon slayer Gruul, this was also a demigod body, even if there was a time limit. Under normal circumstances, Kale, that should not have played his trump cards so early. However, the Alliance's cards were stronger. Vashj, recognized as the strongest among Illidan's subordinates. This wasn't a matter of selection, but a matter of fighting. When Illidan was in control of the Outland, Vashj, Mechtheridon, and Mother Shiraz all seemed to be in this position. Vashj defeated two other strong people before she proudly ascended to that position. No one thought that Illidan's strongest force would betray him just like that. And it was the most thorough kind. He and his subordinates rebelled together. When Illidari and the others heard the news, they were so angry that they wanted to vomit blood. Especially when they saw Vashj use their water pump to pour water into the Moon Shadow Valley and drown a part of the Black Temple, the four of them almost collapsed. They did not know if it was lucky or not, but just when the four of them thought that the Black Temple could not hold on, Illidan rushed back. This kind of twists and turns was too much for the eyes to take in. On one side was the powerful Illidan. On the other side was the even more mysterious weave demigod Duke Marcus. No one knew who the winner would be. Almost as soon as Kale, that's appeared, Illidan felt the four of them waver. Illidan sneered, but did not say it out loud. In his eyes, the deciding factor was always the small group with the strongest power. As long as the final winner was him, then all problems would be solved. He needed to use the Illidari Council to do chores for him, and he also needed to make the four of them think that he still trusted him. Although the lack of absolute loyalty from the four of them made him a little uncomfortable, so what? After being in the Burning Legion for so long, he no longer believed in the concept of loyalty. As long as he had the strength, even the most ferocious demon would obey his orders. It was because of this that he allowed the council to continue to exist, which was filled with inner conflicts. However, he was very interested in what would happen to these four fellows who were the chess pieces of both sides. Perhaps only the goddess of destiny herself knew. After a short confrontation and awkward silence, Illidan grinned as if he was laughing. Duke Marcus, you're quite famous. What, you want to beat me, Illidan Stormrage, with just this doll you brought? Being mocked by Illidan, Duque was not angry at all. He did not expect Mark Dooku, who had limited mana output, to defeat Illidan. Facing me is better than facing Tyrant or Malfurion, isn't it? Duque's words deeply provoked Illidan. One could clearly see the muscles on this legendary figure's face slightly trembling. Duque added, furthermore, you're underestimating the Alliance's strength. Mark Dooku opened his arms. Beside him, two giants as tall as towers immediately took a step forward, the Kiraj twin emperors, genuine demigods who could exert demigod-level combat power with the support of the magic net. They stood 5 steps away from Duke on the left and right. Kale, that's turned into a ball of flame and appeared on Duque's left in a flash. Vashj smiled charmingly, swaying her snake tail in a beautiful rhythm, and stood on Duque's right side. You could say that Duque was arrogant, but you could also say that Duque was showing off. I'm just a little brother, strong and numerous, with 4 demigod subordinates. Do you have that? Although the twin emperors were more dependent on the weave, Vashj and Kai-Zi were strong people independent of the weave. Duke's face was full of anger, and even a little arrogant. "Call your master, kill, Jaden, over, or you'll lose." Duke had such a confident expression on his face. This was not a simple bluff. This was a gamble based on the current situation, and the risk was not high. If the Eridar Gemini's intelligence and history were correct, kill, Jaden was no longer in the twisting nether and sneaking into Azeroth. Otherwise, Illidan would not have had the chance to sneak into Argus to cause trouble. On the surface, kill, Jaden, who was Illidan's boss, could not appear, so the upper limit of the combat power of the next battle would only be limited to demigod level. In other words, if Duke did not come in person, kill, Jaden would not appear. Illidan had just finished causing trouble, and he was also feeling guilty. Of course, he would not put down his pride and send a distress signal to the twisting nether. At this moment, Illidan still did not know that he had already been taken advantage of by Duke. Glancing around, Illidan frowned. "For a grand battle, this place is too small. Come to my training field." After saying that, he did not care about how Duke would respond. He flapped the demonic wings behind him, and his huge body flew up like an arrow. Boom, boom, boom. He completely ignored the thick roof of the temple, and with his demigod body, he brutally broke through layer after layer, rushing straight to the platform at the highest level of the Black Temple. The twin emperors were the first to follow, and on their backs, 2 pairs of cicada-like wings grew just like that. They also followed with incomparable violence, breaking through the roof walls and going up. The Draenei garrison officer Mal Raid's eyes were twitching, but in the end he did not say anything. The Draenei could not beat the enemy and lost their lair. If the enemy helped them get it back, they could not guarantee that they would come back intact. I'll go first." Vashj greeted Duke, tilted her head slightly, and licked her flame-like red lips with her nimble little tongue. This was a secret signal that only she and Duke understood. Duke waved his hand in annoyance, sending her away first. Vashj chuckled and summoned a thick water column. It followed the big hole that the demon King Vec lore had broken through, and under the impact of the water column, it flew up. There was only Kael that's left on the scene. The Blood Elf Prince was a little hesitant. Instead, it was Duke who spoke first. He crossed his arms over his chest and said with a slightly contemptuous tone, "The 4 of you can forget about it. There's no point in continuing to fight. Illidan will not believe in your loyalty even if you fight. If you stop and reduce our troubles, at least after we win, I will spare you once for Kael, that's sake. Remember, your fate is only decided by the victor." Chapter 1484. Duke's words definitely hit the nail on the head. In the original version of history, the Allied forces attacked the Darkness Temple after defeating Vashj and Kael, that's Illidari, and the others, who thought that they had lost their master, chose to stand on Illidan's side and fight the Allied forces to the death. However, Kael, that's the master that they had sworn loyalty to, was standing here, and they had only turned to Illidan because they couldn't resist the demon addiction. With the amnesty of Duke, the number 1 person in the alliance, it would be a lie if they didn't feel relieved. Kael, that's also let out a long sigh of relief. "Duke, thank you." Kai-Zi in this life was good at everything, except that he was too soft-hearted. Duke waved his hand, and Kai-Zi immediately understood. His private mount, Phoenix, immediately jumped out, chirped happily, and rushed straight up with Kai-Zi on its back. On the other side, the soul box seemed to have completed its transformation. It had entered the 2nd stage, the source of desire. Duke looked around and said, "Thrall Willen, I'll leave this to you." Thrall had already stood up, and his face was very dark. If the soul box was just an enemy that could be fought or not fought before, it had now become a target that Thrall and the entire horde had to defeat. Whether it was out of brotherly love or the principle of the shaman doctrine of souls returning to the earth, Thrall and the horde couldn't let Orgrim's soul suffer in the soul box. Thrall also realized that such a powerful Illidan wasn't something that the horde could deal with. Focusing on dealing with the soul box was what the Horde could do now. Thrall nodded heavily in response to Duque's words. Duque, who was in Karazhan, peeked at the situation on the other side. The shadow of Akama was easy to deal with. Now, Varian was leading the Alliance's Horde to fight the six-armed demon matriarch, Shiraz. It could be said that the battles in all parts of the Darkness Temple were at a stalemate. In the temple, Duque raised his hand, and a winged figure suddenly appeared. She was Shatura, the head of the Zerg in the Outland. Duque lifted his chin at the four of them and waved the things in his hand. They were a few bottles of high-purity Sunwell water. This scene caused the breathing of the four people to quicken. While dark energy could temporarily alleviate the demon addiction, but how could the dark energy that was converted from the souls of the earth be as pure and efficient as the water from the Sunwell? Duque smiled. My promise is valid. As long as you don't help each other before we decide who's the winner between us and Illidan. The Alliance will accept you again, and they will not hold it against you for defecting to Illidan. Remember, Illidan's last name is Stormrage. Blood brothers, broken bones, connected tendons. Back then, Illidan had courted death in front of the Night Elves and deserved to be executed. But in the end, Malfurion still used his influence to sentence Illidan to life imprisonment. Just because Illidan was Malfurion's brother and Tyron's unlucky childhood friend, Duque could not kill Illidan. Moreover, as a transmigrator, Duque knew that Illidan's heart was in the enemy camp, and it was very likely that he was the legendary son of light and darkness. After intimidating the four people for a while, the four people silently took a few steps back and stood a certain distance away from Shachula. Duque nodded, and then he flashed to the top of the temple. Blink could not flash into the air, but the floors of the temple were the best stepping stones. When Duque arrived at the highest floor, he was shocked to find that Illidan was King unparalleled. The twin blades of Azzinoth, the symbol of the ugly original sin, were spewing the flames of hell, and the green dark energy was dazzling. This was clearly more than two. On the other hand, on Duque's side, after watching for a few seconds, Duque only had one sentence to say, "What a shame, let's leave the group." Illidan was unparalleled, and Duque's side had 3.5 demigods, and they were actually beaten like dogs. Illidan's high agility and speed was one reason, but more importantly, the four of them seriously lacked coordination. The attack speed of the Sword Sovereign's Karaji Emperor Sword was too slow. This was not a game where one would forcefully lose HP. Originally, the Sword Sovereign swordsmanship was barely acceptable, but in front of a fierce person like Illidan, it was nothing. Thinking about it, Queen Sylvan could dodge in front of him, so naturally, Illidan could too. After discovering that the twin emperors had the same HP, Illidan did not even bother with the Demon Sovereign. After all, Illidan was better at swordsmanship than his magic. And although the Demon Sovereign was proficient in all types of magic, the power of each type of magic attack was limited, and Illidan directly used shadow magic to fight him. On the other hand, Kale, that's used the Sword Sovereign's magic immunity to fiercely throw fireballs, almost turning half of the platform into a sea of fire. In the sky were rolling dark clouds, and on the ground was a sea of fire that seemed to burn to the horizon. It was nice to watch, but it was useless. As long as he was not a demigod, the power of Kaizi's elemental magic could not improve in quality. The gap between mortals and gods was not so easy to bridge. Moreover, the guys in the Burning Legion were really not afraid of fire. Dark energy itself was one of the most terrifying flames in the world. After Illidan took 2 tentative pyroblasts from Kaizi, he smiled contemptuously and ignored Kaizi. When a mage reached Breaking Dawn, they already had many life-saving skills. They could not confine a Breaking Dawn mage's power source in the elemental domain, and it would take a long time to chase a Breaking Dawn. So Illidan played the elimination game with Kaizi. Being hated by the enemy was also a kind of honor. But being ignored by the enemy was a shame. At least Kale, that's had experienced so many ups and downs, and his mentality was more mature and steady. He did not really rush to play melee mage with Illidan head-on, and turned to support Vashj. This was because Vashj, who was more comprehensive, was the one who was the real threat to Illidan. Her nature element thunder magic not only covered a wide range, but the electric shock also had paralysis and deceleration effects. This was definitely a big threat to Illidan, who relied on agility. And Vash's superb archery skills. Sound arrows, silent arrows, invisible arrows, curved trajectory, straight-line explosive shots, attacks that were calculated with precise shooting trajectories would sometimes suddenly form a situation similar to a fatal blow. Several times she almost hit Illidan's vital points, and his scalp went numb on the spot. Almost every time, he narrowly dodged it. Illidan could be considered ruthless. What Duque saw when he came up was Illidan directly summoning a large group of shadowlings to entangle the other three powerhouses, and taking the opportunity to attack Vash. It was true that Vash had 6 arms, and after 10,000 years of training, her 6 arms were extremely coordinated. 2 long swords, 2 daggers, and a staff danced up and down, almost airtight. Even with Illidan's crazy attacks, Vash was not at a disadvantage in melee combat. Vash was at a disadvantage because of Illidan's dark energy. Illidan's entire body turned into a green sun, brutally burning everything within 10 meters of his body. Chapter 1485. Sacrifice. By burning one's own mana, it burns everything around it regardless of friend or foe. Combined with mana burn, it is the nemesis of all spellcasters. Coupled with the high dodge rate brought by high agility, Illidan relied on this combo to dominate the world 10,000 years ago when he was still a moon guard and fought against the Burning Legion in the Ancient War. No one knew how many demons stronger than Illidan died because of this. Even his twin blades of Azeroth were taken back like this. Vash's 6-armed combat style could be said to be no weaker than any melee combatant, but unfortunately, she was facing Illidan. Vash's net of daggers and swords was rarely able to hit Illidan, and even if it did, it would be blocked by the 2 swords. On the other hand, Vash was constantly being burned by sacrifice, mana burn, shadow barrage, soul absorption, and other shadow attribute attacks. Even if Vash had a demigod body, this was still not the way to go. The Sword King killed the shadow demon and rushed over to help. His movements were slower, and it looked like he was more of a hindrance. If Kai Z hadn't given Vash an effect similar to Blazing Haste, which greatly increased Vash's movement speed for a short period of time, perhaps Vash's situation would be even worse. "Traitor! You shall die here!" Illidan opened his big mouth with shark teeth and grinned. "Traitor? Ha! Do you remember what I said to you when I first joined you? Since you are so strong, before a stronger guy appears, I will serve you. Now that my master has returned, I will naturally return to serve my master. By the way, during the ancient war 10,000 years ago, I offered my loyalty to my master, Mark Dooku, who is now Duke Marcus, in the palace of Azhara." Vash said with a smile. There was a fundamental difference between serving and loyalty. When Illidan took Vash as his subordinate, he didn't think so much. With the idea of, "I should be the best in the world," he never thought that Vash would have a master. Vash didn't mention Tyrant at all, but how could Illidan not think of the mess between Duque and Tyrant in Azhara? This made Illidan even angrier. On this side, Vash was clearly at a disadvantage, but her face was still fearless. Her 6 hands continuously launched counterattacks, and from time to time, she would use thunder magic to shock Illidan. Her attitude of absolute reliance made Illidan even more angry. "Ha! Are you still waiting for your master to save you? No chance. He's a coward who doesn't dare to run out of his wizard tower." Illidan roared, his voice almost breaking Vash's eardrums. Illidan's shout made the 3.5 demigods present a little angry, but also a little helpless. Illidan had already used his tyrannical strength to show his dominance as a leader, but what about their boss? Because he was restrained by Kill Jaden, he could not come to Draenor personally. In the beginning, they had hoped to defeat Illidan to prove themselves, but after a short period of failure, their mentality had changed subtly. King against king, general against general. This idea of Azeroth, which had been an iron law since ancient times, began to spread uncontrollably in their minds. Why can't our boss, Duque, appear? In fact, it was not just them. There was actually a very, very faintly discernible will secretly scanning here every once in a while. At this moment, a leisurely and absolutely confident voice sounded. Illidan, you think too highly of yourself if you want my main body to act. However, it's not impossible to let you see the mighty power of a demigod of the weave. The one who spoke was the puppet, Mark Dooku, who had come to the platform and was directly controlled by Duque. In Karazhan, Tyrant suddenly hugged the rising Duque. She was so nervous that tears could clearly be seen at the corner of her eyes. No, you can't go directly. Kill, Jaden is watching you. As soon as your soul enters Draenor, you'll fall into his trap. Duque smiled gently and gently stroked Tyrant's hair. You're not a wizard, so you don't understand. In fact, I don't necessarily have to personally participate in order for an empty puppet to have demigod-level combat power. Behind the humanoid puppet, a colorful portal opened up. An existence with extremely strong elemental fluctuations stepped out of the portal and came in front of Illidan, Vashj, and the other powerhouses. However, his appearance caused all the powerhouses to be dumbfounded. The existence in front of them with a translucent soul was definitely not Duque. However, the powerhouses on Duque's side were not unfamiliar with the newcomer. Khadgar? The person who had come was the great director of the Weave, the originally incomparably powerful great wizard of 3 virtues, Khadgar. The current Khadgar was just a standard elemental creature. His appearance made Kale, that's instantly understand what Duque was doing. The magic circuit was rooted in the soul, and it was a magic system that produced and controlled magic power. To let an empty soul have powerful magic power, not only did it need a tough and incomparably compatible body, but it also needed the soul of a powerful wizard. Duque could not put in his soul, but it did not mean that he could not use other souls. As soon as Khadgar appeared, he took large strides and directly turned his entire elemental body illusory, entering Mark Dooku's body. Then Mark, Khadgar, opened his arms and shouted to the sky, I, Khadgar, open my soul to my lord. The will of my lord is my will. With a burst of purplish-blue arcane light shining in front of everyone, in less than half a second, the Duque that appeared in front of everyone became real. In just an instant, whether it was the phoenix flames that spread almost the entire platform or the evil sacrificial fire that burned everything within a 10-meter radius with Illidan as the center, all disappeared without a trace. The scenery in their field of vision did not change, but in the perception of the powerhouses, what appeared in front of them was an extremely quiet elemental world. The violent fire elemental was as still as water, the surging frost elemental was resting quietly, and the reverberating natural elemental elements circulated themselves according to this world's unchanging rhythm for thousands of years. All the elemental elements seemed so quiet and serene. No one could imagine that just a moment ago, there was a magic war that involved the divine realm. Only the top magic powerhouses could feel the sea of magic. 12 bright moons lit up in the void. These moons were actually the 12 nodes of the weave. They calmly provided elemental power from the entire world of Draenor to the existence at the center of the nodes. Duque opened his eyes, and his pupils were clear. Come, Illidan. Chapter 1486. It was hard to describe what this so-called Duque in front of him was. An empty shell constructed with magic as the core, the soul of a super mage who was supposed to carry the destiny of history but became an elemental life form, and the control of a real demigod behind the scenes. Illidan looked at this Duque with mixed feelings. He felt like he was being fooled, but he couldn't tell what Duque had fooled him about. As for where Jaden had gone, Illidan had a vague guess. What Duke was doing now was fulfilling his duty to protect Azeroth. He had done it to the best of his ability. It was just that no one thought that there would be such an operation. Duque raised his left hand horizontally and gently grasped. A very ordinary brownish-red wooden staff suddenly appeared in his left hand's palm. It had a drumstick-shaped head and a simple belt. Just by looking at its appearance, no one would associate this quaint-looking staff with the legendary Azeroth's strongest staff. But when 3 ethereal crows appeared on the head of the staff and cawed, Illidan felt as if his fate had been disrupted by these crows. Duque spoke. His voice was low and full of a sense of history. This is Utish, the legendary staff of the Guardian. The former Guardian of Azeroth, Medivh, self-destructed this artifact staff as the price to send Sargera's soul into the bottomless abyss. After that, I spent 23 years and finally collected all 42 pieces of it from the hands of Kel, Thuzad and Thun, and rebuilt the staff. Duque opened his right hand and pulled out another weapon from the void. When he pulled out his wrist from the void, circles of golden ripples appeared in midair. What he took out was a glittering holy sword. The sword was extremely slender, and the blade was less than a finger's width. The body of the sword was constantly twisting upwards, like a spiral cone. The hilt of the sword seemed to have added a pair of shining angel wings for the sake of beauty. Compared to the seemingly ancient staff in Duque's left hand, the blade of this holy sword was as clean as new, as if it had just been quenched and forged in a blacksmith's shop. But when Illidan saw it, he immediately trembled. It wasn't that the sword was too new, but that the holy aura that bloomed from it was so strong that not even the slightest bit of filth could accumulate on it. This holy sword obviously represented absolute purification. Duque's voice became lower and lower, but in Illidan's ears, every word was shocking. It was thought-provoking. This sword originated from Quell Zalim, an unnamed product after the original Great Sage sword was split. It used to have an unreliable name. However, after I used it to kill the Demon King Sargeras, the Lich King Nizul, the Flame Lord Ragnaros, the Black Dragon Prince Nefarian, the Defiler Archimond, and the Ancient God Thun, I prefer to call it Duke Marcus Demon Slayer. Every time Duque said a name, he took a step forward. Each step was heavier and more shocking than the last. The holy sword did not kill the nameless. It was precisely because every name that fell on this holy sword once represented an earth-shattering feat that the weight of the sword was unimaginably heavy. For a moment, Illidan couldn't control himself and even forgot to breathe. These names, small ones were famous, big ones resounded throughout the universe. Compared to them, who was Illidan? Illidan more or less knew about Duque's achievements, but when Duque carefully listed them, he clearly felt the pressure in his heart was as heavy as a mountain. Crack! That was the sound of Illidan gritting his shark teeth hard. He didn't know when, but the tip of his left foot that was originally stepping forward moved back by a centimeter. He noticed this at once. This discovery made him ashamed on the spot. Because this proved that he was afraid. In front of Duque, all his efforts seemed to be in vain, and all his achievements seemed to be child's play. When Duque blew up the twisting nether in the War of the Ancients, he was an immature spy. When Duque almost destroyed all the Burning Legion leaders, he was still Jaden's lackey. Without comparison, there would be no harm. Duque's glory was a reflection of his failure. Illidan's muscles swelled to the extreme, and the 2 blades in his hands trembled because he was clenching them too tightly. Thun was at a loss. At this moment in Karazhan, Jaina rubbed her eyebrows. Hey! Duque, although you've beaten up so many powerful big guys, I remember that when you stabbed the Medivh possessed by Sargeras to death, you didn't have this holy sword, right? Duque righteously spouted nonsense. When it comes to aura, as long as you can overwhelm the opponent, it's a success. When it comes to battle results, it doesn't matter if I believe it or not, as long as the opponent believes it and is terrified, then everything is fine. Tyrant, who had been in a state of anxiety, slapped her forehead. Am I stupid to be so worried about you and Illidan? A little. Before Duque could finish, he was glared at by Aurelia, and Duque decisively swallowed the second half of his sarcastic words. In fact, was it wrong for Duque to use his aura to suppress others? Absolutely not. If he could overwhelm the opponent with his aura before the battle, it would shake the opponent's confidence. In a battle like this where the difference in levels was not too far apart, it was the best opportunity. Duque's words were 70% true and 30% false. He was bluffing that Illidan was not well informed. The miserable Illidan had been imprisoned for 10,000 years, and not long after he was released, he jumped ship to the Burning Legion. Then, he was forced by Jaden to run to Northrend to fight against Arthas. At this point in time, it was after Duque led the allied army to kill Archimonde. Many things, even if Jaden kept his mouth shut, there would always be talkative demons who knew about Duque's crazy battle results. Under the spread of false information, Duque's battle results had long been exaggerated many times over. There were two things that were absolutely certain. Duque had personally killed Sargeras and Archimonde. Regardless of whether these two could be resurrected in the future, at least everyone knew that Duque had beaten the Burning Legion until only Jaden was left out of the three. Because of this, Illidan was so afraid of Duque. The wind from the Black Temple blew over, but it was all swept away by the elements around Duque's body that were so dense that they were almost solid. The corner of Duque's mouth rose. He knew that the time had come. Blindly exerting fear would instead arouse Illidan's blood. It was time to set the pace again. Oh yes, I forgot to tell you. After that kid Arthas became a Death Knight, he saw me twice. One time, he broke an arm, and the other time, he was cut in half. I heard that you were beaten up badly by that kid. I hope you don't disappoint me too much. If you're not even as good as him. Chapter 1487. Duque's words were heard by the girls watching in Karazhan, and Jaina rolled her eyes. Although Duke's words didn't explicitly state that he was the culprit behind both of Arthas's deaths, it was clear that he was leading Arthas in that direction. Tyrande was surprised at first, and then smiled bitterly. She rested her chin on one hand and rubbed her eyebrows with the other, thinking, Illidan is a veteran who has lived for more than 10,000 years. Unfortunately, in terms of strategy and tactics, he will not be able to catch up to Duque even if he practiced for another 10,000 years. Aurelia shrugged. She knew Duque was good at borrowing power and accumulating his own advantages. There was no way to interrupt Duque at the beginning, and like a rolling snowball, Duque became the behemoth he was now. Who would have thought that at the beginning, Duque was just a little guy with a bit of strange ability? Now, he was almost the hope of the entire Azeroth. When Duque mentioned Arthas, it was like slapping Illidan in the face. His face, which had turned dark and green because of his dark powers, became very interesting. Is that all you can do? Illidan said fiercely. Oh. Duque laughed. He raised his left hand that was holding the staff and swung it horizontally, his palm slightly upward, and hooked his index finger at Illidan. Then come, it's just you and me. My men will not attack you. The twin emperors, Kai Zi, and Vashj all stepped back, giving enough space for the two bosses to fight. Illidan's eyelids twitched. To be honest, if Duque came with his luxurious lineup, he would really have a headache. Just now, he could beat these four guys because they lacked coordination, and the key was that they lacked a true core. Once Duque appeared, then these four guys would undoubtedly all follow Duque's lead. The combat power of a demigod could be fully released. Just dealing with Duque alone was naturally more ideal in terms of tactics. Unfortunately, knowing that his opponent was just a puppet, Illidan had a feeling that he would lose regardless of whether he won or not. Indeed, Duque's main body could not descend, but it did not mean that Duque could not create a new puppet mage. Illidan really did not understand what kind of existence the demigod of the Weave was. Illidan shook his head and forced the distracting thoughts out of his mind. No matter what the result was, he could only fight. Otherwise, his foundation would be completely destroyed. With a cold snort, Illidan's huge body suddenly disappeared. He did not use the demonic spells that he was very familiar with. The other party was obviously an existence that had reached the pinnacle of elemental mastery. Blindly bombarding him with magic might not be able to gain the upper hand. Illidan brandished Azanatha's dual blades and attacked. There were no feints, no probing, only absolute speed. It was so fast that the naked eye could not catch it. It was unimaginably fast. It reminded people of the countless times in the ancient war when Illidan charged past quickly, every demonic movement was frozen, and then purplish-blue blood sprayed out from the vital points. When Duque realized that Illidan had gone behind him and was about to slash him from behind, there was a moment when Duque thought that he was in trouble. Illidan was fast, but the reaction of the system elf was even faster. It was completely beyond the limits of what Duque could react to. The system had already activated its own defense. Woo! The elements that were extremely calm a moment ago seemed to be stretched in the space according to Duque's will. The terrifying cold light that suddenly shot out reminded every powerhouse of a weapon, and they felt a bone-chilling coldness from their bones straight to their heart. Illidan instantly judged that if he rushed in without a care, the chill would climb up his body in the next moment, and then instantly freeze, and then form a thick layer of ice, sealing his movements. Illidan's expression suddenly changed, and his body that had been greatly strengthened by his dark powers made an unimaginable move. In the blink of an eye, his huge body that was charging forward suddenly did a backflip. His feet, which had turned into hooves due to his dark powers, kicked the air, and with the help of the two balls of dark flames that appeared out of thin air, he completely changed his direction and somersaulted 3 times in the direction of where he came from and flew backward. He used too much force, and when he retreated, his hooves plowed 2 fist-deep marks on the solid floor of the temple. It was only then that Duque slowly turned his body and turned his head to look at Illidan, with a winner's mocking smile on his face. Heh, pretty fast reflexes. Illidan's face alternated between green and red. Compared to Duque's methods, his attack just now was like a clown. This was like a duel between 2 people. One of them used a sword dance to create 81 sword flowers, and it looked very beautiful, but who knew that he would be defeated by the other in 1 move? It was really embarrassing to the Twisted Nether. While the girls in Karazhan were amazed, only Jaina was a little puzzled. Why do I feel like you were the one who didn't react just now? Smith. Duke's slap landed on Jaina's perky buttocks, causing Jaina to yelp in shock. She covered her buttocks and jumped up shyly. Who asked you to talk? Believe it or not, I'll go you later. Of course, outsiders would not know that Duque really didn't react, and only felt that his boss's level was off the charts. Gas, who was standing 50 meters away, had her beautiful eyes flashing. Her flushed face made people wonder if she had some crooked thoughts in her mind just now, and she was having a good time. On the other side, just a test had made Illidan's heart sink. He only felt that Duke Marcus had defeated so many peerless masters, and he really lived up to his name. Tisk! Illidan spat. He was not willing to accept it. He absolutely did not believe that a demigod who had not even descended could have such terrifying strength. This puppet wearing the skin of Duke Marcus, with an incompatible soul as its core, must have some weakness. Illidan moved again, this time faster. He ran around Duque, maintaining a distance of at least 10 meters. His speed was so fast that he actually left a blurry shadow on the outer ring. No one could sense his specific location, only the heavy tread of the demon's hooves on the stone floor could be heard. Sacrifice. Mana burn. The combo that had never failed before was used again. But it was useless. A group of elements rose up in front of Duque's left, looking like a mushroom cloud that had shrunk to the size of a palm. It was obvious that the elements there had all been stimulated and exploded out of control. However, this group of elements was at least 2 meters away from Duque. The smile on the corner of Duque's mouth became clearer. Chapter 1488. Illidan's mana burn sounded very powerful. With a small amount of magic power, he could cause chaos in the opponent's magic circuit and cause damage. In fact, this was a high-level upgraded version of the mage's mana seal. The difference between the two was that the mana seal would only cause temporary chaos in the opponent's magic and prevent them from casting spells. On the other hand, mana burn would inject more chaotic magic power into the opponent's body, focusing on causing all the magic power in the opponent's circuit to overload, or even cause the circuit to explode, destroying the opponent's magic storage and damaging the opponent's circuit. Since Duque had been plotting against Illidan for so long, how could he not guard against Illidan's move? Even if Illidan had long been in his demon form and seemed to have forgotten his signature skill, Duque would never forget it. Moreover, Vashj and the others had already gone up to test the waters. According to the results, Duque was even more certain. Therefore, in the surrounding void, Duque had already set up a series of magic loops similar to magic circuits. On the surface, these loops were an extension of his personal magic circuit. They were tactile and control lines, but in fact, they were not directly related to the magic circuit he had now. They were purely used to prevent Illidan's mana burn. Until now, the feeling of failure was displayed so clearly in front of the arrogant Illidan for the first time. In every battle he fought in his life, he could calmly control the life and death of others. But at this moment, he finally understood that when his best attack method was mercilessly suppressed, the weaker party was as weak as a drowning person who was bound by the goddess of fate and then mercilessly thrown into the sea to wait to drown. That was the deepest sorrow. The move that he was most proud of since his debut had been completely destroyed, and his desire and confidence for victory had been mercilessly trampled. His heart finally showed signs of being unable to bear it. Before, he thought that as a new demigod, Duque often relied on the help of strong people to achieve such achievements. In terms of strength and status, he was only on the same level as him. If that was the case, of course, he could use all kinds of methods to give Duque a show of strength. But now, not only did he realize that he had failed to put on a show of strength, but he had also made a grave mistake. That wasn't some newly ascended demigod at all, nor was it a lucky person who had forcefully stepped into the divine territory by relying on his powerful physical body or some other special trait. Instead, it was a terrifying existence who had already grasped the core meaning of the divine territory. No, once Duque was able to become one with heaven and earth, he would be able to use the power of the planet endlessly. Even if the amount of power Duque could use was limited, he would still be an absolute existence that was about to step into the realm of true gods. Duque gently propped a tish on the ground and smiled. "Yo, Illidan. If you have any other moves, hurry up and use them. I'm looking forward to the power you'll gain after joining Kill Jaden. Next would be Dark Bullet Screen, Soul Extraction, Fire Explosion, or Flame of Pain." Duque counted Illidan's moves one by one. Every time he counted one, Illidan's face darkened. If his trump card was known by the enemy, how could it still be called a trump card? He didn't know when, but the psychological pressure that Duque put on him was getting bigger and bigger. Duque took 3 steps towards Illidan. "Illidan, although I'm not in a hurry, I advise you to move faster. Otherwise, as the commander of the Alliance, sometimes it's not good for me to fight with the people below me." Fight for what? Of course, it was to kill. Duque gently raised his left hand, and at this moment, the battle scenes throughout the Black Temple were unreservedly displayed in front of Illidan. On the periphery, the Alliance and Horde soldiers rushed in and swept away the resisting demons step by step in a disciplined manner. The cannons first fired a round of bombardment, then the grenadiers threw all kinds of holy water bombs. Even if they couldn't kill them, they would still cripple them. Then the archers suppressed them, and finally, the infantry advanced. On the Horde side, it was simple and violent. Often, it was a direct Loktar, ogre, charge. If they couldn't kill the enemy, they would consider it their loss. Anyway, outside the front line, the reinforcements and the injured soldiers formed 2 parallel lines that did not intersect. They were busy and orderly. The demons and fell orcs that Illidan had set up in the temple retreated step by step. On the Alliance's side, Mother Sharas had been beaten like a dog by William and his men. Her arrogant and frivolous expression could no longer be seen on her face. 2 of her 6 arms had been chopped off by William, and her body was riddled with wounds. All that was left was the question of how long she could last. On the front line of the Horde, Willin and Thrall worked together to attack the soul box. It was obvious that they had reached the end stage. Illidan took one look and knew that the soul box would not last much longer. Of course, what was even more infuriating was that in the video, he saw Illidan and the other 4 members of the Alliance doing nothing. That's right, on the surface, Duque seemed to be thinking for the 4 of them. But in reality, would he allow the 4 of them to join Illidan again? After all, they were 4 people who had stepped into the realm of heroes. He would not let Illidan take advantage of them again. Duque used this method to secretly take advantage of the four of them. And the last scene made Illidan's face as dark as ink. This was because he saw Akama, whose soul had been extracted by him to guard the temple in the form of the shadow of Akama, sneak into the most secret prison of the temple and release the guy that he absolutely did not want to see again, Maev Shadowsong. Only the most powerful will could allow people to track evil and enter the dark abyss without being tempted by the power of demons. This was the will of Maev Shadowsong. Before the War of the Ancients, Maev Shadowsong was a high-ranking priestess of the Night Elves. For someone who did not have noble blood, this was a very impressive achievement. However, the terror and chaos brought about by the invasion of the Burning Legion made her deeply feel that only quick and decisive action was the only way to solve the problem. When the traitor Illidan was not sentenced to death, but was instead sentenced to life imprisonment, she could not contain her anger. However, she still offered to be Illidan's guardian until the day he died. She also gathered other priestesses to assist her and established the Watchers, an organization dedicated to defending the Night Elves from evil. After Illidan escaped from prison, Watcher Shadowsong embarked on a journey to hunt him down. In the process, many Watchers died, but her will never wavered. Her firm belief in order and justice carried her through many difficulties, including the time when she was captured and imprisoned by Illidan. Now that Maev Shadowsong was released, it was obvious that according to her personality, the first thing she would do was to find trouble with Illidan. Illidan suddenly felt annoyed. He really did not know what would happen if he fell into Maev's hands. But it would definitely be an ending that had nothing to do with happiness or stability. Illidan suddenly had an ominous feeling that he would fail. Chapter 1489. Illidan had experienced too many failures. If it weren't for his stubborn personality, his repeated defeats, and his unyielding character, most people would have collapsed long ago. Even Duque would have committed suicide after being locked in a small black room for a month, let alone being locked in a small black room for 10,000 years. In terms of willpower, even if he wasn't weak, it wasn't his strong point. An egg had a crazy amount of confidence, and had survived time and time again. But so what? Could it stop him from failing again? Duque saw Illidan's expression and knew that his psychological attack had worked again. Although he could not understand the relationship between Maev Shadowsong and Illidan, it was indisputable that Illidan did not kill Maev immediately after capturing her. Although Maev had tortured Illidan many times in the past 10,000 years, it was an indisputable fact that Illidan did not kill her immediately after capturing her. Was it the other way around? Or was it the other way around? Or should he leave her a way out in the future? Or should he leave her alone in the future? Or maybe it was all three. Duque didn't know. Anyway, Duque only knew that Maev was very strong. If she wasn't strong, she definitely wouldn't have been able to chase Illidan like a rabbit. If Duque wasn't wrong, Maev Shadowsong should have some kind of demigod body, and it was similar to Illidan's. Otherwise, Illidan wouldn't have needed to team up with a group of subordinates to capture Maev. When Tyrande, who was in Karazhan, saw this scene, she felt as if she could already see the ending. Duke was like the most skilled hunter, forcing the beast, Illidan, step by step, into the trap that he had prepared beforehand. This was not only the suppression of the general trend, but it was also a chain of nooses. Hey, Duque, why do I feel like you're the main antagonist this time? Jaina very cleverly pointed out this point. Slap. Last time, he slapped the left side, this time it was the right side. Woo-woo! Jaina cried. She had been a little princess since she was young, and when she grew up, she became a queen. Other than Duque, the bastard master who pushed his disciple, who else would dare to slap her but? Do I need you to speak out of turn? On the platform of the Black Temple, Illidan was obviously affected. He moved again, and this time, he actually made a mirror image similar to the Sword Saints. At this moment, there were a total of 4 Illidans in 4 different directions, pacing in an invisible circle. Huh! Duque let out a breath of turbid air. He had never seen Illidan use this move before. However, if all of Illidan's moves were the same as in the game, then it would be too boring. Even though he was the pharaoh back then, he had no interest in such things. However, as the leader of the team, he had a wealth of experience from farming Illidan countless times. Coupled with the accurate 3D simulation of Illidan by the system elf, it was to the point where Illidan knew that he was pooping when he limped. Duke Marcus, repent for provoking me again and again. Sorry, as a demigod, I really don't know who to repent to. Duke had a strange smile on his face. In the next second, Illidan knew why. Besides, I know this move of yours too. True mirror image. Opposite to the 4 Illidans, 4 identical Duke suddenly appeared out of thin air. Their height, figure, clothing, appearance, and even their expressions and the magic contained within were all the same. If it wasn't for Duke deliberately leaving a loophole, even people like Vashj probably wouldn't be able to tell who was who. Duke let the 4 new mirror images hold different weapons. These magic weapons of different styles came from the Molten Core, Blackwing's Nest, Naxxramas, and the Temple of An-Kuraj. They were a powerful bonus to the mirror image's spellcasting ability, and also a great proof of Duke's success in conquering the various forbidden lands. As his strength increased, these weapons and equipment were no longer useful to Duke, but they were all soulbound. It was a waste to turn them into enchantment materials. Anyway, there were plenty of places, so he might as well keep them as souvenirs. Now that he used them, it was another slap in the face for Illidan. I'm even holding the real thing in my doppelgangers. Do you have the ability to make 3 pairs of twin blades of Azzinoth? Fortunately, Illidan didn't have his eyes anymore, otherwise wouldn't his eyeballs have popped out this time? Behind the black cloth covering his eyes, a ghostly green light flashed nonstop. It was obvious that Illidan was very angry. Calm down. Calm down. I must calm down. Although he knew that Duke was provoking him, looking at Duke's irritating face and thinking that this was the guy who had taken over his beloved tyrant, Illidan couldn't keep calm at all. 4 loud shouts exploded in 4 directions at the same time. In the next second, all 4 Illidans disappeared. Mirror Doppelganger was a skill that he had learned from a fell orc sword saint, and it took him a long time to master. This skill had a very high requirement for talent, and it also required the coordination of the brain and the ability to command. He really didn't believe that a weak mage who didn't use all 4 limbs could have that kind of reaction and face attacks from 4 directions at the same time. Actually, Duke really didn't have that. However, Illidan knew too little about Duke. From the beginning, Duke was famous for his so-called metamagic ability, multicast. Not to mention with the help of the system elf, Duke could even make 100 doppelgangers with different movements and independent reactions. However, it would be difficult to maintain the combat power of the doppelgangers, and it would be an unnecessary burden to the Outland Weave. So there were only 4 and it looked like one-on-one. In reality, there was a fundamental difference. Duke used 4 doppelgangers to deal with Illidan. Illidan was playing 1+3 with his main body and 3 doppelgangers. In the other 3 directions, one of Duke used an icicle to resist the impact of an Illidan, another used Dragon's Breath to resist the shadow impact of Eggy's doppelganger, and there was a pair of Ice Ring and Ice Spear to lock Eggy's doppelganger and a Throwing Blade. In the main direction of Illidan's main attack, the real Egg Blade drew a mysterious arc, and in half a breath's time, it cut the doppelganger and the ice barrier that was released at the critical moment in 2. That mirror doppelganger of Duke let out a very realistic scream, which made even the Karazhan women's hair stand on end, and then disappeared. The apprentice left a candlestick-shaped staff that fell from midair. However, just as Illidan sped up and sprinted, suddenly a huge elemental palm fell from the sky. Chapter 1490. If the attack of the giant hammer was like the weight of Mount Tai, then the attack of the axe was like the splitting of heaven and earth, giving off an irresistible sense of toughness. Pure speed often came at the expense of explosiveness and destructive power. Illidan was not afraid of his opponent's speed. His body, which had been greatly strengthened by dark energy, was enough to allow him to ignore most low-intensity attacks. The chaotic aura of dark energy that lingered around him was also enough to crush any low-purity magical element. Now, the feeling that this elemental palm gave Illidan was the perfect combination of toughness and toughness. It was obviously the most rebellious magical element in the atmosphere of the Outland, but not only was it extremely tame, but it also reacted abnormally fast and violent. How could he dodge? The elemental palm covered an area of 100 meters. If there were no obstacles, Illidan could still dodge at high speed. But when he thought of dodging, he was shocked to find that because of the sudden influx of a large amount of frost elements, the surrounding temperature not only dropped sharply, but also greatly slowed down. Raising his head suddenly, Illidan's face showed an indescribable strange expression. The green flames in his empty eye sockets, which acted as eyeballs, stared at the huge elemental hand that was rapidly expanding in his field of vision. Bang! It was a direct blow that could shatter the heavens and the earth. The entire darkness shrine was shocked, and even William and Shiraz, who were fighting fiercely, stopped for a while. After hitting Illidan, the violent elements poured out in all directions. However, Duque slammed heavily on the ground, making an incomprehensible metallic sound. In Karazhan, Jaina looked at this scene in shock. Duque's control and shaping of the elements had completely subverted her understanding. In Jaina's concept, when the element that was shaped into the desired shape hit the target, it should have completed its task. But it was not the case for Duque. The small scattered and exploded elemental balls were forcibly stopped under Duque's will and reshaped. Jaina even saw the shape of the chainsaw that was widely used in the Alliance. All the elements flew back and frantically attacked Illidan, who was suppressed in the sunken ground and unable to move. Pierce his skin, rip his wings, destroy his muscles. As if he was lifting weights, Illidan held the giant elemental hand that was falling from the sky. He used his body that had been strengthened by his dark powers to resist the mountain-like pressure as he roared like a wounded beast. Along with the roar, his entire body was immediately bathed in the flames of evil power. The evil energy that originated from the distorted void was brutally burning everything in its path, attempting to devour all elements that were suppressing him, attacking him, and harming him. Duque frowned slightly. At first glance, Illidan's actions were as ridiculous as a snake trying to swallow an elephant. But why did the Burning Legion burn down one planet after another, killing all life and turning those planets into barren lands? Of course, some of the demons were bloodthirsty, but more importantly, the army needed to collect more dark energy in order to expand. The source of dark energy was harvesting, squeezing, corrupting, and finally transforming life and souls into dark energy. If left unchecked, once Illidan devoured more than half of the elements around him, or if Duque lost control of the elements, it would not be fun. Duque had not used the holy sword since the start of the battle. He gently shook the sword, and suddenly 4 phantom clones of Alonso's Fail bathed in holy golden light appeared around Illidan. In the blink of an eye, 4 became 16, 64, and 1024. The holy light archbishop's phantoms were densely packed, all of them coming from the same mold, filling up the entire platform. Seeing that they were surrounded by a group of Alonso's Fail, even Kaisi and Vashch were extremely surprised. Every single Alonso's was chanting a mysterious and strange prayer, their chanting echoing in the air above the platform. Light comes from darkness, and from darkness comes light. It was repeated over and over again, like an endless brainwashing cycle. Illidan knew that the easiest way to deal with this kind of chanting was to not listen, not listen, not listen. But Duque was even more shameless than him. He used the elemental hand to press down on him, so that he had no hands to cover his ears. On the other side, Tang Sanzang's chanting spiritual pollution was activated, and under the control of Alonso's who was hidden in the magic net, the phantom clones of the 12 archbishops began to activate the magic circle. This holy light circle, which was taught by Willin, could really reverse the energy that was corrupted by dark energy. It could be said to be the nemesis of dark energy. B** starred. Illidan was furious. He never thought that Duque actually had the power of the holy light. Duque laughed. What? You're only allowed to devour my elements, and I'm not allowed to convert your dark energy? You're the first, and I'm the 15th. It's very fair. Duque's fair and just look almost made Illidan's lungs explode. Don't besiege my lair if you can? Of course, Illidan could not say this out loud. He could only keep it in his chest, feeling very uncomfortable. The green dark energy was still surging around his body, and in a short span of 10 breaths, suddenly, the dark green light shone brightly. Even on the plains outside the Black Shrine, a huge green light pillar could be seen shooting up into the sky from the top of the shrine. What is this? Every single one of the allied soldiers was stunned. A terrible roar came from the top of the shrine, and everyone could not help but look up. The shrine did not stop shaking, as if something terrible was being nurtured above, and was about to wake up. A faint roar came from the end of their vision, as if an ancient giant beast was roaring. The evil aura was so thick that it was almost tangible, and it made the entire sky above the holy shrine gloomy. Dark clouds rolled in the sky, and suddenly there was a flash, and a very unusual black lightning split the chaotic starry sky, and descended from the sky. The next moment, what was supposed to be a bright lightning bolt suddenly turned everyone's vision black. Although this period of time was very short, it naturally caused widespread panic. Holy light! What the hell happened? It was as if a portal had opened in the sky, and something seemed to pour out from it, but nothing could be seen. In everyone's vision, it was all hazy, as if all the light had been swallowed. F***CK. Illidan, what the hell did you do? When Duque saw this, there was only one thought in his mind. As expected, history was not reliable. Behind Illidan, there was a human figure formed by dozens of highly concentrated dark energy that looked like dark runes. Chapter 1491. The upper body of this thing was a few runes that were built together, and the lower body had runes that were spread out as feet. All the runes on the whole were on a flat surface. As an old player, a veteran transmigrator, and someone who had once personally gone to Shotrath City to embark on a pilgrimage but was actually collecting Naru's holy water, foot-washing water, how could he not recognize that this thing was once a Naru? But seeing his terrible color that was 100 times darker than coal ash, Duque immediately knew that this thing was a fallen Naru. According to history, there should never be a dark Naru on the list of bosses in the Black Temple. The problem was that ever since Duque transmigrated, he had never stopped causing trouble. Not to mention a dark Nar, even if Kill Jaden came, it would not be impossible. As the worst butterfly that changed history, Duque said that if he did not curse, he would have nothing to say. Kai Zi, who was next to him, finally came to a realization and said, "It's Muru." It was originally a guard of the storm, but when Illidan led the army to attack the storm for the first time a few years ago, it was taken away. Duque's teeth hurt. Duque would not feel strange if anyone said this, but since it was Kale, that's who said it, then he really did not know what to say. The storm, to be precise, was originally an interdimensional spaceship used by the mysterious Naru to travel in the universe. 25,000 years ago, Willin, who refused to be in cahoots with Kill Jaden, took his compatriots and fled Argus in the Naru's The Storm. When the Naru came to the Outland and entered Shotrath City to participate in the battle against the demons under Illidan, only Muru was left as a member of the Storm. In the original history, it was Kai Zi, who became Illidan's subordinate, who led his thugs to carry out a raid on the Storm, captured Muru, and sent him as a gift to the main city of the Blood Elves, Silver Moon City. During the invasion of the Scourge, many priests lost the ability to sense the holy light. They thought that the holy light had abandoned them, so they abandoned the path of the holy light and tried to enslave the holy light. Muru was imprisoned in the basement of Silver Moon City. Every Blood Knight needed to obtain the pure power of the holy light from him to enslave the holy light. Under the continuous extraction of countless people, Muru's holy light power became extremely weak. Under such circumstances, Muru was corroded by Kill Jaden's power and degenerated into a dark Naru. Because he was a pure energy body, he could also transform into a terrifying entropy demon. It appeared in the Sunwell Highland as the fifth boss. Moreover, it was very honored and awesome to be one of the members of the horrifying boss club that Daddy Blizzard can't kill if you don't slash it. Countless elite guilds' first clear teams had been annihilated like dogs in front of Muru, who was at the level of a father. Now, the goddess of fate seemed to have played a bad joke on Duque. She actually turned the Dark Nar, who was supposed to be created by Kaizi, into a strong ally for Illidan. Duque did not know what Illidan had done to Muru, nor did he know if Jaden had left anything behind. All he knew was that things were getting out of hand. Duque suddenly realized something and turned his head a little uneasily. He opened his mouth wide and shouted at Vashj and the others. "Do it!" However, in the vast expanse of strange black light, the darkness seemed to devour everything. After a circle of black light suddenly burst out from Muru's body, a black hole formed above Muru's head, and then the entire world became silent. Every powerhouse saw the people around them shouting something, but they could only see their mouths open and close, but no sound came out. Sound seemed to be completely devoured. Not only sound, but also elements. The elements such as arcane, fire, and frost that Duque relied on as his greatest help were all swallowed by the black hole created by the Dark Nar. Without the arcane elements, there was naturally no magic communication. In the next moment, the 5 powerhouses, including Duque, were shocked because they found that even each other's vision began to blur. Human vision was because light entered the eyeball and formed nerve signals in the eyeball, which were transmitted to the brain and adjusted by the brain to form a picture. If even light was devoured, then there was no need to care about vision. Duque's face was pale. He really did not expect that Illidan could actually make a move like Muru. It was difficult to define what kind of existence a Dark Muru was. Muru itself was not very scary. What was scary was that it could be used as an existence similar to a nuclear power plant and do all kinds of incredible things. Under normal circumstances, it was a sacred source of holy light. This level of consumption of holy light footwash was definitely a drizzle, and it could make as much as it wanted. And the Dark Naru had released its stored dark power, which was now this black hole. Duque did not know how much things or energy a black hole of this level could devour. He only knew that it was definitely a lot. He had to do something, otherwise Vashj and the others would probably be wiped out in the Black Temple. At this moment, in the middle, Sal and Valen had reached the final stage of besieging the soul box. It seemed that they would be able to overturn the soul box with a little more effort. But at this time, everyone felt the black hole located at the top of the Black Temple. Valen stopped. He raised his head and looked up at the place a few floors above. He gently raised his hand, and the holy light that spread out from his body outlined the shape of the Naru at the top. Iril the Hoof said in a trembling voice. So it's here? Valen replied in a voice that seemed to be in a trance. Will the Naru also fall? That big black hole gives me a very bad feeling. Iril's voice became more and more shaky. If left alone, the black hole may even expand infinitely, and within a few minutes, the entire Black Temple and even the entire Draenor will be swallowed up. What? This time, even Sal could not remain calm. He led the Horde army here, of course, for justice, to free his compatriots from the slavery of Illidan. But so many of his compatriots died with Illidan, this was definitely not what he wanted. Can't you do something? Woken shouted. Of course. Valen said firmly, and at the same time he turned his head and shouted, the road of the Draenei against the Burning Legion, someone must continue to carry the war flag. I have led everyone for so long, and it is time to let go. I have my duty, and you have your duty. I announce that the next archbishop will be Iril. The Hoof was stunned. What? Merid, who was fighting, suddenly realized something. The Draenei warriors guarding the outer perimeter were also unable to remain calm. What was Archbishop Valen doing, actually announcing the next archbishop in advance? Chapter 1492. This was obviously entrusting an orphan to him. In terms of reputation and experience, how could a little Imriel be the archbishop? Even if she was now the successor to the archbishop, she was still far ahead of him. At that moment, some Drenii were indignant. Nar can prove Imriel's piety, and she will be the best bridge of communication between the Drenii and the higher-ups of the alliance. Valen only had time to say this sentence before his entire body lit up. That was the purest form of holy light. In an instant, Valen's figure became extremely tall, even reaching the ceiling of the palace that was more than 20 meters tall. In a trance, everyone seemed to hear the purest and most beautiful hymn. Countless golden runes floated in the palace, each rune shining brightly. Not only did they dispel the surrounding darkness, but they also passed through the thick ceiling and reached the highest level of the Black Temple. Duque suddenly understood. He waved his hand and stopped trying to gather the elements to fight against the black hole. Instead, he went into a strategic defense mode. At the same time, he turned a large number of elements into a giant hammer and smashed through several floors of the temple with a loud bang. The dense ice element formed an absolute domain that protected Willen. The berserk wind and snow shattered all the flying rocks, but did not harm Willen in the slightest. An ice stairway appeared, leading from the middle level to the top of the Black Temple. Don't even think about coming up. Illidan was also anxious. Of course, he knew how difficult it was to deal with Old Man Eridar, who was first on Jaden's kill list. Once his holy light got close to Muru, there would probably be variables. Therefore, his choice was to take advantage of the opportunity when Duque reduced the Elemental Hand's elemental output to forcefully break free and directly attack Valen. Illidan never expected that the person who stopped him was not Duque, but Kael. That's Kai Z snorted coldly. His entire body seemed to become one with his phoenix, turning into a giant phoenix that firmly blocked the stairway that Valen came up from. The fire elements of the phoenix were not extracted from the outside world, but from its own power. As a divine beast, when the phoenix unleashed its full power, anyone would have to avoid its sharp edge. Go away! Illidan performed a gorgeous maneuver similar to Thomas's spin. As he flew backwards, he slashed at Kael that's more than 10 times. As a fire mage, Kai Z did not have ice barrier. However, Illidan had forgotten that the prerequisite for fire element was arcane element. Kai Z's arcane magic was also very good at it. Impact barrier. This shield was a headache for many players before he transmigrated. It could absorb a huge amount of damage. Even with the sharpness of the egg knife, it was able to withstand the first wave of attacks. When the shield was about to shatter, Kai Z knew he had completed his mission. He didn't persist and instantly retreated. This time, it was Vasht's turn to shoot dozens of lightning arrows at Illidan. Illidan was filled with hatred. Vasht, you traitor! Traitor? Ha! Vasht showed a look of concern for the mentally handicapped. Illidan protected his vitals at the critical moment and took more than a dozen arrows, all for the last chance to fight back. After adjusting his posture, Illidan still had a chance to rush over again. At this moment, there was a sudden crack under his feet. As an old rival who had loved to kill each other for 10,000 years, Illidan's heart skipped a beat. He knew what he had stepped on, Maev Shadowsong's damn trap. Not to mention that he was slightly injured now. Even if he was at his peak, he would not be immune to Maev's trap. This was a trap specially made for a half-elf, half-demon like him. The person who understood you the most in the world was definitely your enemy. Maev had chased Illidan for so long and specially made a perfect tonic wine. It was not something that Illidan could easily break. Kneel down. Maev's cold voice sounded behind Illidan like a ghost. Sure enough, with this declaration, Illidan's knees softened and he knelt on the spot. It was the kind of extremely bitter and absolutely helpless kneel. Maev's figure, wearing a dark green cloak, suddenly appeared behind Illidan. She was like the most ruthless assassin. With her sawtooth ring that looked like the sun and moon Vajra wheel, she slashed at Illidan's back fiercely. Almost every time the wheel went down, it would take a large piece of Illidan's flesh, pieces of bat wings, or the muscles of his back. This big sister watcher, who was imprisoned by Illidan and then turned over again, mercilessly cut the flesh of her most hated prisoner. Valen originally wanted to climb up as fast as possible, but he found that Duque had thoughtfully turned the ice stairs into a hand elevator. The ice stairs automatically and quickly lifted Valen up, giving Illidan and Muru the illusion that there was a small sun slowly rising under the Black Temple. The light was like the first light of dawn, washing away the darkness. It even outlined the fine lines on the floor of the decisive battle platform that were painstakingly drawn by the Drenii craftsmen in the past. On the plains far away from the temple, the soldiers who were waiting to attack saw with their own eyes the terrifying dark ball of light that had just risen up, disintegrating like a stain washed away by the river. Bathed in the holy light that was like the rising sun, Duque couldn't help but sigh. As expected, the holy light of the little priest Alonsis Fail couldn't compare to the old priest Valen. But no matter what, it seemed that Illidan's fate of kneeling had deviated from its original trajectory and was forcefully corrected by the hard work of the crowd. So what if you have Muru? I have Valen on my side too. The degenerate and the fraud were a perfect match. Muru, who was originally going to destroy everything with the black hole and ruin Duque's victory, suddenly burst into flames in front of everyone. A golden flame burst out from his dark chest, and soon after, golden cracks spread from the location of the flame to the entire black body. On the surface, it looked like it was going to turn the entire dark Naru into ashes, but in reality, just as the Naru of the light could turn into a dark Naru after using up all of the holy light, the dark Naru could also turn back after using up all of its shadow power. The rune-like components on Muru's body started to light up with golden halos, and this change sped up the fading of the black color on his body. In just 3 seconds, Muru, who was supposed to be a great enemy, was now glowing with golden light and once again became a holy Naru. Praise the holy light. Alonsis Fail, who had originally used the magic net to send his clone to the scene, was happy when he suddenly realized that the holy light behind him had weakened. The first thing he saw when he turned back was Valen, who had collapsed on the ice platform, and Imriel, who had rushed to the platform without him knowing, had a blank expression on his face. Chapter 1493. At this moment, Duque's mind was in a mess. No matter how he looked at it, Valen looked like he was about to die. Duque cursed in his heart. He really wanted to yell, "Goddess of Fate, this isn't the right script." In the original history, Valen had indeed died. Why was it said that one died? Because in the version of King of Draenor, the Valen in the main timeline was fine. Instead, in the Draenor world where the brainless roar went to cause trouble in another timeline, the Valen in that branch of time died trying to save a fallen Naru. The one who died was something like a clone, Valen. And now you're telling me that the Valen in the main storyline is in trouble? Duque really couldn't figure it out now. Duke knew that she must be feeling terrible as she watched Valen fall to the ground and Imriel rush over to help him up. Valen lay on the ice, the holy light that surrounded him moments ago as bright as the rising sun was getting weaker and weaker. He didn't say a word and just smiled. Like a doting father, he stretched out his trembling hand and gently stroked Imriel's head. The holy light on his body had disappeared, and now he looked no different from an ordinary old Drenii. One couldn't tell at all that he used to be one of the 3 big shots of Eridar, along with Kill, Jaden, and Archimonde. Duque was a little lucky, but also a little unlucky, to witness the scene of Valen's death. At this moment, Duque suddenly understood. In fact, Valen was very old, even for the Drenii who claimed to have eternal life. In the torment of being chased 25,000 years ago, in the repeated assassination and encirclement, it was impossible for him to not be injured at all. Valen might have been unable to hold on for a long time, but with a stubborn persistence, he stubbornly stood in front of his people. He wanted to use his last breath to find a way out for his people. But at the same time, he also wanted to repay the Naru tribe for saving the Drenii. If it weren't for the Naru who used a spaceship to rescue the Drenii who refused to associate with Sargeras from planet Argus, there would probably be no Drenii left in the world, and no one would know the secret of the Burning Legion. Over the years, Muru had protected the Drenii more than once. This was an inevitable repayment. Whether it was for Muru, or for the sake of purifying the dark Naru called Kara, Willen would sacrifice his life without hesitation. Imriel looked sad, but when she realized that Wayland's death could not be reversed, she accepted it. A Dreamy-Eye girl's ethereal and clear voice echoed in the sky above the black divine palace. With the help of the translator, Duque understood. The darkness will eventually pass, and all the suffering will be worth it. May our companions be as numerous as the stars in the sky, as endless as a stream. I hope that pain can sharpen our hearts, and that failure can guide us. I hope that we can meet more comrades. I hope that we can finally defeat the Burning Legion. Listening to Imriel's singing, Duque fell silent. He still did not know what to do about Willen's death, or rather, he was at a loss. Suddenly, Duque saw Willen smiling at him. The Dreamy-Eye prophet raised his right index finger shakily, and used the last of his strength to shoot a beam of light at Duque's brow. The next moment, Duque, who was in Karazhan, found that his will was connected to a strange world. He immediately saw an unusual sky above his head. Four conspicuous moons immediately attracted his attention. The air was amber, and the blue rock veins twisted and intertwined in thousands of different ways, forming strange rock structures. Duque did not see any water source, but the blue rocks were like surging waves that were frozen in an instant. The scene was like the fantasy of a talented artist. Some creatures were scattered on the surface of the rocks, or hovered in the air. They came in all shapes and sizes, and some were even difficult to describe. Bright colors, different movements, dances, games, battles. Almost none of the patterns formed had any real meaning. Duque tried his best to find an abstract meaning in all the chaos. At this time, a creature that looked like a Dreamy-Eye appeared, leading many demons, and began to kill all the creatures in this world. This guy easily used green energy to flatten everything around him. After clearing up an empty space, he knelt in the ruins that he destroyed, and used his claw-shaped fingers to draw mysterious symbols with terrifying energy. When he was done, the slaughter around him stopped. At this moment, it was abnormally quiet, and the whole world was in a terrifying silence, waiting for the death knell to ring. Then, there was an explosion that destroyed the world. When Duque tried to divert his attention to try to trace this spiritual message, the transmission stopped. Wait, Willen, haven't. When Duque came back to his senses, something even more ridiculous happened. Under everyone's gaze, Willen's translucent soul flew out of his body, and was then sucked into the soul box that was on its last breath. *CK. What the hell? Not only did he suck Orgrim, he even sucked Willen's soul. You're just a soul box, you're going against the heavens. For a moment, Duque had the urge to destroy the soul box on the spot and save Willen's soul. But at this moment, Thrall and the others could not stop in time, and directly destroyed the last form of the soul box, the Source of Wrath. After all, the Source of Wrath had something called Wrath Aura. Who knew how much wrath energy was stored in the soul box, and when it released this negative energy, everyone in that space would have to bear the shadow damage that would double over time. Without a transcendent existence like Duque to hold the line, this was a battle of mutual harm. Either Thrall and the others would be crushed to death by the shadow energy, or they would destroy the soul box first. The current situation was just that cruel. They did not dare to stop, and they could not stop. Looking at the soul box that sucked Willen's soul in at the last moment, and then turned into a delicate little box, everyone, be it the Alliance or the Horde, was stunned. They did not know what expression to use to face the situation. Can I use vulgar language? Can't? Then I have nothing else to say. Duque's head was about to explode, and he did not know what to say. But before he gave a sad speech, there was one last thing to do: take care of Illidan. Chapter 1494. The Dreamy-Eye were on the verge of losing their minds. Back in Argus, they had a prosperous country and kind people, but all of that had been ended by Sargeras' power. When the other two leaders had turned their people into the devil's minions for power, Wang had indeed chosen to lead his people into the light. However, this time, they had been on the run for a full 25,000 years. During this painful and unforgettable period, it was Wang who had been the spiritual pillar of the Draenei. He had constantly guided them, encouraged them, and led them out of despair and hardship. It could be said that for many Draenei who had been born on the spaceship and on the run, Wang was their only hope of survival. Now, this pillar of support for the entire race, the immortal Wang, had suddenly fallen without any warning. This caused all the Draenei to fall into grief and madness. Narrated was in a rare state of rage. He waved his holy light warhammer and rushed up the ice stairway that had carried Wang to the highest point of the platform. Suddenly, the heaven's stairway broke. Narrated fell from a height of more than 3 meters. Then, he saw Duque standing at the edge of the hole, and anger welled up in his heart. "Duke Marcus, what are you doing?" Duque turned around slightly, his eyes sharp. He glared at Narrated. "Look at your holy light, and think about what Prophet Wang taught you. Fighting against evil requires a warrior with a pure heart, not an avenger. Are you worthy of Wang's teachings?" Narrated's body trembled. Only then did he realize that the holy light on his body had become sparse and messy. The holy light was the purest manifestation of the will of justice in one's heart. If the motive was not pure, the holy light would naturally not be pure, and the power of smite would plummet. Narrated was speechless. On the other side, Immortal gently put down Wang's withered body that had lost its soul. She picked up her warhammer. Immortal's body lit up with a holy golden light. This was the Black Temple, the darkest and most filthy place in all of Draenor. Eridar warlocks from the twisting nether carried out all kinds of forbidden experiments, and the wails of the souls of the wronged filled the once sacred hall. Hence, the sky above the darkness shrine was always shrouded in the most evil and thick black clouds. However, at this moment, a golden dot of light grew larger and larger. From a small dot, it became a golden pillar of light that pierced through the heavens and the earth. At first, it was a little vague, but soon, everyone heard a female voice. She said, "Prophet Wang's flame of life has been extinguished. The Draenei are not destroyed. The Draenei people love peace, but as long as the Burning Legion is not destroyed, the Draenei people will join hands with everyone in the Alliance to raise the Alliance's war flag high and let it fly high above this glorious world. Long live the Alliance." It was a vow to fight. Every Draenei, every allied warrior who could see Immortal, could clearly see the warhammer in Immortal's hand turning into a golden torch. The holy light was blazing, burning fiercely. Then, another pillar of light pierced through the heavens and the earth. That was the will of countless Draenei paladins and priests. Then, the pillar of light gently turned into a beautiful arc of light, merging with Immortal's pillar of light, becoming an even bigger pillar of light. Duque was a little stunned. He watched as Immortal's body was surrounded by golden flames. In an instant, a dazzling soul war flag rose from Immortal's back, and immediately turned into a pair of shining golden wings. Now, Immortal had 2 wings like her compatriots. However, the Eridar demon had ugly bat wings, and now, her hooves looked more like an angel. All right, hooves and angels. Just the thought of it made Duque drunk. He really did not know that there was such a trick. Thinking about it, it seemed reasonable. After all, when he did not give up his moral integrity, it was because of a kind-hearted big boss who passed it on to him that he was able to avoid the crisis of his soul falling into depravity. Spiritual energy originated from the soul. Since souls could be passed on, as one of the greatest manifestations of soul energy, it was not impossible to pass on the holy light to others. Of course, the hooves were not that powerful, but the problem was that Wang had them. Looking at the system notification, Wang passed about 18,000 years worth of holy light energy to Immortal. Duque felt a headache coming on. Once upon a time, Duque was a Wuxia fan. Every night, when he could not sleep, he would fantasize about some old man passing on 60 years' worth of inner strength to him. Now, that old fart Wang actually gave Immortal the holy charlatan card. Now, the hooves were really going against the natural order. Looking at the shiny golden hooves that were even more holy than the golden holy Saya, Duque felt a little sad. 18,000 years worth of holy light energy. Why didn't you give me some? While Duque was complaining, he suddenly received a message from Alonso's fail. Duque, His Excellency Valen seems to have poured all the remaining holy light energy that he could not into Imriel's body into the magic weave before he died. The system notification again. Valen has injected about 8,000 years worth of holy light energy into the magic weave. That's good. Valen, you're a good friend. I'll take care of your hooves from now on. Even though he knew that Valen could not give him the hooves, that feeling was like winning the lottery or opening a treasure chest and getting a divine artifact. Her hooves fluttered her golden holy light wings unskillfully and rose into the air. Then, with a ridiculous posture similar to a standing long jump, she jumped onto the highest platform of the Black Temple. Commander Marcus, I, Imriel, as the Drenii leader candidate, request to join the crusade against Illidan. The sound of her hooves was sonorous and powerful. At this time, there was no longer any hesitation on her youthful face. Duque instinctively wanted to refuse at first. It was not that he did not think highly of Imriel's potential, but it took time and opportunity to turn potential into strength. Since ancient times, many geniuses had failed halfway and could not fulfill their potential. Valen suddenly died, and Duque did not want another Drenii leader to die. This was because the rest of the Drenii were mediocre people, and Duque did not want to see any of them die. But when he saw the girl's pleading eyes, Duque nodded. Originally, you were not qualified to participate in a battle of this level. This is your protection. But seeing that His Excellency Valen sacrificed himself for the Alliance, I agree. This time, I will hold the line. Remember, you owe me a favor. No problem, Imriel replied brightly. Her hooves sang the holy light battle song loudly, bathing her in light and charging straight towards Illidan. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.